Chapter 701. Eric flipped through the script page by page, and noticed that Gwyneth Palpatine was still pestering him. In order to prevent her from continuing to pester him, he took out a few pages of the female lead scenes in 7 Deadly Sins, and handed them to her. Here, take a look. Are you interested? Gwyneth? Palpatine took it in surprise and said excitedly, Eric, is this for me? Eric shrugged. If you're interested, I'll give you the role. Gwyneth? Palpatine did not say anything else and quickly looked down at the few pages of the script in her hands. However, she was soon disappointed. After Eric handed her a few pages, he did not continue to give her the script. This meant that the female lead only had a few scenes. She had acted in a few movies and knew some common sense about scripts. After a little calculation, she knew that these scenes added up to less than 10 minutes, and the role did not have much room to play. It was just some daily interactions with the male lead. Basically, it was the kind of role that the audience would quickly forget after watching it. Not to mention, this script seemed to be a low-budget crime thriller. A female lead with less than 10 minutes of scenes in a low-budget crime thriller. If someone else gave her this script, Gwyneth Palpatine would not be so picky. Perhaps Paltrow would not be so picky and would accept it after a little consideration. She was still self-aware. With the influence of the Paltrow family in Hollywood, at most, they could only help her get some low-cost female lead roles in independent film companies. Her parents' connections were basically unable to touch the films produced by the 7 major film studios. Even her godfather, Spielberg, had only let her make a cameo appearance in Captain *************. After that, she had not been able to get any roles in Spielberg's films in the past few years. However, this script from Eric was far less than Gwyneth Palpatine's. Palpatine expected. With Eric's status in Hollywood, as long as he helped her pull some strings, she would be able to get the lead actress role in an A-level production, even if it was a film company that was competing with Firefly. Gwyneth? Even Gwyneth Palpatine did not doubt Eric's influence. The script in her hands gave her the feeling of a billionaire taking out a 1-cent coin. Eric read the script in his hands, and compared it with the differences in his memory. He inadvertently glanced at Gwyneth Palpatine, who was holding a few pages of the script with a disapproving expression. Palpatine could probably guess what she was thinking and smiled in his heart. She had helped him think of this film. If she was willing to take the role, Eric did not mind giving her the female lead role as a reward. However, if she did not like it, Eric would not do anything else. Gwyneth Palpatine's memory? Paltrow had a lot of films, but none of them left a deep impression. Even Iron Man's Little Pepper. Eric knew that the main reason why Marvel chose her was because she was cheap. In a commercial film with a production cost of over $100 million, it was rare to see an Oscar-winning actress with a salary of $3 million. Even if it was a pure actress who did not have a strong box office appeal, after winning an Oscar and then acting in a commercial film, her salary would not be lower than $3 million. Perhaps this also indirectly proved that Gwyneth Palpatine was not as good as Gwyneth Palpatine. Gwyneth Palpatine's acting skills. Gwyneth Palpatine? Paltrow didn't know what Eric was thinking. Seeing that he was focused on reading the script in his hands, he didn't disturb him. He flipped through the papers in his hands in boredom, thinking about how he should open his mouth and get closer to Eric. After a while, she was getting impatient. Then she heard the doorbell ring. Eric also raised his wrist and looked at his watch in confusion. It had only been half an hour since he called the new line. He thought that even if David Fincher was in Los Angeles, he would not arrive until noon. He did not expect it to be so fast. Hearing the doorbell ring a few times, Eric looked up and saw Gwyneth Palpatine. Palpatine? Gwyneth? Palpatine sat there in confusion for a moment. She quickly got up and smiled politely. Eric, sit here. I'll go open the door. Seeing the woman walk away, Eric's lips twitched. He also got up and tidied up the scattered documents on his desk. 3 years ago, he was lucky enough to be chosen by Fox. Scott and James Cameron took over the lead role of the 3rd film in the Alien series from the hands of 2 great directors. Vinci had originally planned to go all out, but in the end he was greeted with a bucket of cold water. The cost of Alien 3 was more than twice that of the previous 2 films. After the film was released in North America, the box office and reputation of the film were the lowest in the series. Also, during the filming, David Fincher had various conflicts with the producers. Fincher realized that Hollywood was not that fun. After the box office failure of Alien 3, David Fincher had to leave. He had to leave Hollywood temporarily to continue shooting music videos. 3 years passed in the blink of an eye. Although he had received some film offers during this period, most of them ended in the negotiation stage. The conflict was basically centered on the control of the film. David Fincher? Vinci did not think that the failure of Alien 3 was entirely his fault. At that time, not only did he not have the final editing rights, but even the rights to modify the script were in the hands of Fox. The final film was not at all what he had originally conceived. That experience also made David Vinci very frustrated. Fincher made up his mind that if he could not get enough creative rights for future film offers, he would rather not shoot. Today, he was discussing the production of a music video with a singer living in Beverly Hills when he suddenly received a call from an unknown number. It was Eric? Williams wanted to see him, David Fincher thought. The first thing he thought was that the other party must be joking. Everyone in Hollywood knew about Eric Williams. That was for sure. But he was also sure that Eric Williams could not have known him. After some communication, he finally realized that this was most likely true. So he hurriedly said goodbye to the singer and drove to the location mentioned on the phone. Until he rang the doorbell, David Fincher's doubts were still there. Fincher's doubts did not dissipate. He thought of some recent rumors in Hollywood. Heard that Eric Williams gave Firefly's key film project next year to 2 rookie directors. Although the media's comments on this matter tended to be cautious, in private, many people were looking forward to seeing Firefly fail in this matter. Then Eric Williams suddenly found him. It must be related to the film. The door of the mansion opened, and a woman in a black knee-length dress appeared in front of him. Fincher pulled himself together and reached out his hand to her, but for a moment he was speechless and did not know how to address her. "Hello, I am Gwyneth Palpatine." Gwyneth Palpatine? Palpatine also did not know David Fincher. With Fincher's identity, looking at the other party wearing a white loose long-sleeved t-shirt and sweatpants, he did not show contempt at first and politely shook hands with him. "I am David Fincher. Mr. Williams asked me to come over." Although he said so, David Fincher still felt guilty. He could not help but doubt the phone call not long ago again. If it was a prank, today would be a big embarrassment. Fortunately, reality did not disappoint him. "Gwyneth Palpatine?" Palpatine nodded and let David Fincher in. Vinci let him in, closed the door and said, "Follow me." Seeing David Fincher, Vinci walked over, and Eric stood up to greet him. They shook hands and gestured for him to sit down at the long table on the balcony. Seeing Gwyneth, Palpatine also wanted to sit down. Eric helplessly pointed at the coffee pot on the table. "Gwyneth, can you make 2 cups of coffee for us?" "Oh, okay." Gwyneth Palpatine was stunned. Pallet was stunned for a moment. He picked up the coffee pot reluctantly, and only bared his teeth angrily when he turned his back to the two of them. Eric turned his attention to David Fincher. The current David Fincher? Fincher did not look like a middle-aged uncle. He was in his early 30s, thin and tall, and dressed like a hippie. Looking at David Fincher, Eric directly handed the script of 7 Deadly Sins to him and smiled. "I think you must be wondering how I found you. However, let's not talk about these boring details. I have seen Alien 3, and happen to have a script in my hand. I think you can give it a try. Although we are still unfamiliar with each other, I think we will definitely get to know each other in the future. Oh, you can call me Eric." Eric's words also made David Fincher relax. Vinci relaxed and took the script. He also smiled and started to read it. "Gwyneth?" Palpatine dawdled for a while before bringing the coffee over. Eric took the tray and said, "Gwyneth, if you are not in a hurry to leave, you can watch TV for a while." "Gwyneth?" Palpatine paused for a second. This time, he did not hold back. He curled his lips in front of Eric, but he still obediently walked into the mansion. He walked into the living room and kicked the sofa with all his strength. He said angrily, "Seriously, asshole, do you think I will steal your script?" Eric sat on the side, drinking coffee and quietly working on his email for about half an hour. Fincher put down the script and said, "Eric, I finished reading it." "Oh." Eric sent out the email he just wrote. He closed the email interface and turned to David Fincher. Fincher asked, "What do you think?" The theme of the script is pessimistic and dark, but the plot structure is very clever. Maybe we can make a very special film. Before Eric answered, David Fincher's expression changed. Vinci calmed himself down and said seriously, "Eric, although I really hope that I can work with Firefly and you, there is one thing that I want to make clear." "Please." Eric gestured for him to go ahead. "David Fincher?" Fincher said, 3 years ago, my work with Fox was not very pleasant. The whole shooting process was spent in arguments and disagreements. I don't think Alien 3 is my work. I don't want this situation to happen again. So, if you just want to find a director who will completely follow your will, I'm afraid it will be difficult for us to work together." Eric nodded and said, "I understand. James Cameron? He also doesn't admit that Piranha 2 is his work. You two are quite similar. Then, you can tell me your request first." David Fincher? Fincher did not expect Eric to be so easy to talk to, but he did not dare to ask for too much. From the bottom of his heart, he still really wanted to work with Eric. After thinking for a moment, David Fincher said, "I want to change the script." Vinci said, "I hope to have the right to make appropriate changes to the script, and I don't want anyone to tell me what to do during the shooting. Also, I saw that the budget of this film is only $8 million USD. This is far from enough. As a drama film, we must have enough budget to invite good actors to support this film. As for the final editing rights." Speaking of this, David Fincher felt that it was too much to ask. He scratched his head and hesitated for a moment before saying, "If possible, I want to participate in the final editing." "Then, let me tell you my request." Eric listened with a smile and said, "The directors who have worked with me before all know my habits. If you continue to work with me in the future, this principle will not change. First, we will discuss and reach an agreement on the script. At this stage, you can propose your own changes. As long as I think it is reasonable, I will accept it. Since I want you to direct this film, then I recognize your shooting style. So as long as the script is confirmed during the preparation stage, I will not interfere too much with the director's shooting. But my request is that once the script is confirmed, I don't want the director to make any major changes during the shooting stage. This way, we can limit our differences to the early preparation stage. If we can't reach an agreement, we won't waste too much time. In addition, the budget is not a problem. As for the editing rights, I can't make too many concessions in this regard. I retain the final editing rights, but I usually delegate the most power to the director. In this regard, you can talk to the directors who work with me, and you will have a rough idea of how much power I can delegate." Eric's relationship with Cameron and Roland? The final editing rights of Emmerich and the others' films were usually given to them. This was because the two of them were purely commercial directors, and didn't have much personal will to express. But for David Fincher, Eric had some reservations. David Fincher's personal style had always been very strong. The film 7 Deadly Sins in his previous life was the result of a game between him and New Line. If he gave it to Fincher, the result would probably be David in his previous life. After Vinci's 7 Deadly Sins, the failed mind games, that was completely based on one's personality. Chapter 702. Eric and David Vinci chatted until the afternoon. After confirming most of the details of 7 Deadly Sins, David Vinci no longer had his initial hesitation. Eric's cooperation method, which seemed very bold in other Hollywood studios, made him feel very comfortable. Before he left, he gave a definite promise to direct the film. After leaving their contact information, Eric personally sent David Vinci off. At noon, the little girl did not come back. She only made a phone call and was intimate with him. She even insisted on ordering takeout for Eric from afar. However, Gwyneth Paltrow did not leave. After sending David Vinci off, Eric did not want to spend any more effort to deal with her. In the eyes of those small-time actors with no background, the Pallet family could definitely be considered a rich family in Hollywood. However, in Eric's eyes, it was not worth mentioning. Both sides did not have any relationship, so Eric did not need to give any face. After David Vinci left, Eric politely asked her to leave. Since she did not like the female lead of Seven Deadly Sins, Eric did not insist on using the original cast. In Eric's view, this seemingly insignificant role was actually the turning point of Gwyneth Paltrow's career in Hollywood in his previous life. Even if she relied on her family's influence to act in 10 small independent films, the influence it brought would definitely not be comparable to Seven Deadly Sins. After all, independent films that only grossed 1 or 2 million at the box office, or even had the chance to be released, basically could not bring much fame to the actors. For actors with mediocre qualifications, the best way to maintain their careers was to show their faces in blockbuster movies. Once they had enough popularity, they would also have box office appeal. Only then would they be able to get better movie contracts. As for how far Gwyneth Paltrow could go in Hollywood if she missed out on this film, Eric did not care. In the following days, until the Academy Awards ceremony, Eric spent his time busy with script discussions, auditions, budget meetings, and a series of other things. The Oscar PR for Saving Private Ryan was secondary. After confirming Seven Deadly Sins, there were 7 films that Eric needed to pay direct attention to that had entered the substantial production stage. These included Titanic, The Matrix, Life-Ending Island, Jedi Cop, and Seven Deadly Sins, which were scattered across several labels under the Firefly Group. In addition, there was also Men in Black 2, which was a collaboration with Columbia, and Thunderbolts 2, which was produced by DreamWorks Productions, which was a collaboration with MGM. In addition to these live-action films, Blue Sky Studio successfully completed the transaction and was affiliated with 20th Century Fox. The inside story of the deal quickly spread in Hollywood. Knowing that Blue Sky Studio would receive full technical support from Firefly in 3D animation, it naturally aroused envy. There was no film company in Hollywood that did not covet the 3D animation technology in Firefly's hands. During this period, Fox also quietly obtained the film rights of Shrek. At the same time, Eric also gave the idea of Ice Age to Chris Wedge in advance. These 2 popular animated film series alone were enough to feed Blue Sky Studio for 10 years. During this period, the only thing that did not go well was the copyright of Transformers. Elizabeth wanted to quietly negotiate with Hasbro for the live-action film adaptation rights of Transformers, but Hasbro was different from other copyright holders. As a world-class toy giant, although they knew that once the live-action version of Transformers was filmed, it would play a great role in promoting the sales of their toy series. However, Hasbro was not soft-hearted at all when it came to the conditions. Not only did they ask for a huge copyright fee, but they also limited the production scale of the film and asked for joint investment in the film. Of course, Elizabeth would not compromise easily. As soon as the 2 sides were in a stalemate, the news quickly spread in Hollywood. There was no shortage of smart people in Hollywood. When the news spread, some people noticed that Elizabeth was the one leading the copyright negotiations. Some people sensed that there was a Firefly behind this matter, so the result was predictable. There was a rush, and Hasbro was also immediately waiting for the best price. In order to show their innocence, Firefly also joined the competition. However, Eric did not give a high price, and the desire for competition was not too strong. Because of the limitations of special effects and other aspects, it was far from the time to produce the live-action version of Transformers. In fact, the best time to produce Transformers was 10 years later. Even if it was earlier, it would be best to put it after 2000. Before that, if they wanted to produce the live-action effects in Eric's memory, the cost would definitely exceed $200 million. Otherwise, the effect would only be passable. Eric did not believe that the other major film companies would have the courage to invest $200 million in a movie. Moreover, even if they had the courage, it was impossible for them to have special effects that were ahead of the industry in the digital field. As for the special effects company that produced the live-action version of Transformers in his previous life, Industrial Light and Magic, at this time, was far behind in the digital field. Without these prerequisites, Even if the other major film companies snatched the copyright and forced the project to start, the chances of success were not high. If they failed, the copyright would naturally be shelved. It was only 1995, and there was still a lot of time. Who knew what would happen during this period? It was late March, and the Oscar Awards were approaching. However, before that, the most sensational event in Hollywood was the Canadian Seagram Group. After more than half a year of negotiations, they finally reached a deal with Panasonic to acquire Panasonic's MCA Group and its Universal Pictures for $7.5 billion. This deal should have been completed at the end of last year, but because of the Michael Ovitz incident at the end of last year, the parties involved in the deal argued for a long time about the huge amount of compensation for Michael Ovitz's departure. There was even news that the negotiations had broken down. The deal was delayed for more than 2 months, but in the end, it was completed smoothly. Although Panasonic, Seagram, and Universal did not reveal the details of the compensation agreement with Michael Ovitz, it was not a secret to Eric. Michael Ovitz eventually received $120 million as compensation from Universal, which was shared by both Panasonic and Seagram. At the same time, Universal's CEO, Michael Eisner, also signed a new employment contract with Universal during this period, voluntarily reducing his options and bonus ratio for the next few years. Although the dispute was finally resolved, there was no winner in this incident. Panasonic and Seagram were naturally furious about the $60 million that they had taken out for no reason. Michael Eisner was also very depressed about his salary being reduced. As the apparent beneficiary of this incident, Michael Ovitz was actually the biggest loser. If he had not left CAA in the first place, Michael Ovitz could have received tens of millions of US dollars in dividends every year with only half of CAA's shares. In order to join Universal, Michael Ovitz left with nothing and sold all of his CAA shares. He wanted to make a name for himself on a broader platform, but he was chased out of Universal in less than a year. The other major film companies in Hollywood had no intention of accepting him, so it was even more impossible for him to return to the management industry. CAA would not welcome back the king, who had already retired. The stable monopoly of ICM, WMA, and CAA had also cut off his path of starting from scratch. It could be said that Michael Ovitz, a formidable figure in the entertainment industry in the 80s, had completely lost his career in Hollywood. Losers could only be quickly forgotten, but the upstarts in Hollywood couldn't wait to make their presence known. After the deal was completed, the head of Seagram Group, Edgar Bronfman, quickly sent out invitations and held several consecutive grand parties at Universal Studios in Burbank. It was quite a bit of a welcoming of the new power. It was the early days of the Oscar award ceremony, so celebrities gathered in Los Angeles. Naturally, there were many attendees. Night had just fallen, but the party hall inside Universal Studios was already filled with people. There was a steady stream of guests coming from all over Los Angeles. Edgar Bronfman was happily greeting the important guests in the hall when he was stopped by Michael Eisner. Beside Michael Eisner was a middle-aged white man in his 30s. "Edgar, this is Alan Hassenfeld, the CEO of Hasbro that I mentioned to you before." Michael Eisner enthusiastically introduced the two. "Alan, this is Mr. Edgar Bronfman from Seagram Group." Seagram Group and Hasbro actually had some similarities. Both companies were family businesses and were controlled by the founder's family. Seagram Group was founded by the Bronfman family in the early 20th century, and Hasbro was also founded by the Hassenfeld family in the early 20th century. Although Universal had gone through a few months of turmoil, everything still had to go on. During the acquisition negotiations, Panasonic had also proposed that since the conflict between Michael Eisner and Michael Ovitz was irreconcilable, then the one with the cheaper penalty should be kicked out. Michael Eisner was undoubtedly the cheaper one. In the end, Edgar Bronfman forcibly protected Michael Eisner. Panasonic was going to leave Hollywood, so naturally, they had no scruples. However, Seagram Group knew that Michael Eisner, who had already made a name for himself at Universal, was definitely more valuable than Michael Ovitz. In comparison, the difference of tens of millions of dollars in penalty was nothing. Therefore, Michael Eisner was also eager to prove the correctness of Seagram Group's decision. Therefore, he was particularly eager to fight for the copyright of Transformers. He could be said to be one of the first people to realize that the copyright of Transformers might be related to Eric. Moreover, even if this matter really had nothing to do with Eric, after a period of detailed research, Michael Eisner also discovered that the Transformers toy image, which had a worldwide reputation, would definitely have great commercial potential if it was made into a live-action movie with the current popular CG special effects technology. It was completely worth it for Universal to snatch the copyright at all costs. Edgar Bronfman had already heard Michael Eisner's detailed evaluation of the copyright of Transformers. When he heard him introduce Alan Hassenfeld, he was also very eager. Michael Eisner was eager to make some dazzling achievements to prove himself. And so was Edgar Bronfman, who had bet most of his family's resources on Hollywood. "Alan, I hope you can have a good time tonight." Edgar Bronfman shook hands with Alan Hassenfeld with a smile and said, "Regarding the copyright of Transformers, I hope you can carefully consider it. Universal is very sincere in cooperating. Of course, Hasbro also very much hopes to reach a cooperation with Hollywood." Alan Hassenfeld's eyes were shrewd. He did not give any answer and answered ambiguously with a smile. Edgar Bronfman did not seem to feel Alan Hassenfeld's perfunctory response. His smile remained unchanged as he said, "In that case, Alan, how about we play golf together tomorrow? We can talk about it in detail then." "Edgar, I may not have time tomorrow. I can only apologize." Alan Hassenfeld shook his head. Michael Eisner knew that it was impossible to reach any agreement on such an occasion. The most important thing was to entertain Alan Hassenfeld well. He noticed that Alan Hassenfeld's eyes were looking at the surrounding crowd from time to time and said, "Alan, if you want to know any of the guests here, maybe I can introduce you." Alan Hassenfeld smiled and did not speak. He just gently brought the red wine in his hand to his mouth. Edgar Bronfman's eyes flashed. He realized that Alan Hassenfeld had appeared here without a female companion. After thinking for a while he said, "Alan, the girls in Hollywood are very enthusiastic. You must not be restrained. If any of the actresses you are interested in is not here, we can help you contact them." As they were talking, there was a commotion at the entrance of the party hall. The three of them could clearly feel that everyone's eyes around them had turned in that direction. Some guests were even walking towards the door. Michael Eisner and the other two looked over curiously. At the entrance, 5 dazzling girls walked into the party one after another. Like 5 mermaids, they instantly became the focus of everyone's attention. Although there was no lack of beauties in Hollywood, these 5 tall girls were dressed in gorgeous haute couture dresses and high heels. Coupled with 5 delicate and flawless faces, they immediately showed a kind of glamorous momentum. It was as if they had instantly attracted the brilliance of all the women in the hall. Looking at the 5 enchanting beauties not far away, Edgar Bronfman could not help but sigh in his heart again at Eric Williams's taste. Although they were not movie stars, the media still paid a lot of attention to these 5 Victoria's Secret angels in Hollywood recently. They would also be presenting the first award of this year's Oscars as guests. Moreover, in many people's opinion, with their current popularity, there was almost no threshold for them to enter the film and television industry. Not to mention Eric Williams's glittering connections. If they showed the intention of acting in films and TV series, the film companies that were interested in them would definitely not be stingy with their movie contracts. In the past, if supermodels wanted to act in movies, they could usually only get some insignificant roles. This was because even if they reached the peak of their fame in the circle, they often did not have much public awareness. But under the operation of Eric Williams, these 5 Victoria's Secret angels had completely jumped out of the supermodel boundary. At this time, they were completely national-level sexy idols. Thinking of Eric Williams, Edgar Bronfman had mixed feelings. Of course, it was impossible for him not to invite him to the recent party. In order to show his importance, after sending the invitation, Edgar Bronfman personally called him. But Eric did not attend the previous parties, and he did not know if he would appear today. When Michael Eisner saw the appearance of Cindy Crawford and the other 4 women, he also had mixed feelings in his heart. When they first met, the young man who seemed a little arrogant to him now not only stood at the peak of Hollywood, but also spread his strong influence outside of Hollywood. and he was still racking his brains to think about how to stabilize his position in Hollywood. However, Michael Eisner's sigh did not last long. His attention quickly turned to Alan Hassenfeld. It was meaningless to think about these things that had become facts. The most important thing was to do the things in front of him well. Noticing that when the CEO of Hasbro looked at the 5 women surrounded by people, his eyes also had the same unconcealable eagerness as a man, Michael Eisner thought for a moment, and suddenly had an idea. He reached out and pulled Edgar Bronfman beside him, secretly giving him a look. Michael Eisner said to Alan Hassenfeld, "Alan, these 5 beauties should be the most beautiful in the world. Let's go and get to know them." Edgar Bronfman did not understand Michael Eisner's meaning, but he said very cooperatively, "Yes, in the recent selection of the most beautiful female stars of the year in some magazines, the 5 of them are basically in the top ranks. It would be a pity if we don't get to know such beauties." With the two's urging, Alan Hassenfeld no longer refused. He nodded and said, "I'm also looking forward to getting to know them." While the 3 of them were talking, the 5 Victoria's Secret angels, surrounded by different guests, had gradually scattered around the hall. Michael Eisner took Alan Hassenfeld directly to Diane Kruger, who was wearing a burgundy evening dress. Chapter 703. Seeing Michael Eisner and the other 2 walking over, the guests around Diane Kruger sensibly took the initiative to leave. Diane Kruger's manager whispered a few words into her ear. The girl nodded slightly and gracefully shook hands with Michael Eisner and the others. "Mr. Eisner, Mr. Bronfman, thank you worldwide for inviting us to this party." The agent didn't introduce Alan Hassenfeld, so Diane Kruger greeted Michael Eisner and Edgar Bronfman first. "Miss Kruger, it's the honor of this party to have you here." After complimenting them, Michael Eisner gestured to Alan Hassenfeld and took the initiative to introduce him. "This is Mr. Alan Hassenfeld, the chairman and CEO of Hasbro." Diane Kruger's burgundy gown made her look like a blooming rose. Her delicate face had a hint of immaturity and childishness. This contrast made many mature middle-aged men feel tempted. Alan Hassenfeld's eyes were filled with obvious eagerness. He held Diane Kruger's little hand and said, "Miss Kruger, you're so beautiful tonight. I've seen your performance at the Victoria's Secret annual show. It's really tempting. I'll definitely be there at the end of this year. Will you still be attending this year's Victoria's Secret show?" Diane Kruger felt that the other party seemed to have held her hand for a little longer. She was a little surprised. This was the first time she had been so obviously pestered. With a polite smile on her face, she pulled her hand back slightly and replied, "Yes, Mr. Hassenfeld. I've signed a 5-year contract with Victoria's Secret." "Oh, that's great." Alan Hassenfeld didn't feel the slightest bit embarrassed when the girl shook off his hand. He continued to speak politely. After chatting for a while, Michael Eisner used the excuse that there were guests and walked away with Edgar Bronfman. Turning to a slightly quieter corner, Edgar Bronfman couldn't wait to ask, "Michael, did you make a mistake? That's Eric Williams' woman." For this kind of party, if one deliberately didn't bring a female companion, it was usually with the intention of being sexy. In order to get the rights to Transformers, if Alan Hassenfeld took a fancy to any of the female stars present, as long as it wasn't one of the top big names, Worldwide only needed to matchmake them and promise some cooperation in the film industry. Alan Hassenfeld would be satisfied. Hollywood was chaotic. This was a well-known fact in the circle. However, many people knew that some women couldn't be provoked. Diane Kruger, a girl who had just turned 18, had rocketed from an unknown model to one of the 5 most famous supermodels in the United States and even the world in less than half a year. If it was said that she had nothing to do with Eric Williams, who was behind her, no one would believe it. Therefore, people who knew a little bit of the inside story labeled Diane Kruger as Williams. Even if they coveted her, no one dared to do anything. Because of Eric's strong influence, Elite, who was in charge of the girls' modeling agency, and ICM, who was in charge of her entertainment agency, protected her like a princess. Many people could feel that compared to the other 4 Victoria's Secret spokespersons, Diane Kruger's brand endorsement and commercial invitation were often the most difficult. Michael Eisner was well aware of these things. When he heard Edgar Bronfman's question, he looked at the crowd around him and whispered, "Of course I know that she's Eric Williams' woman." Imagine if Alan Hassenfeld were to hit a wall in front of her, or even further discord with Eric Williams. Would the film companies under the Firefly system still be able to get the rights to Transformers? Born in a wealthy family, Edgar Bronfman knew from a young age that business competition had always been unscrupulous. If you wanted to play a business war game warmly, the result would only be a crushing defeat. After Michael Eisner finished speaking his thoughts, he easily agreed. However, a trace of concern still arose in his heart. He looked at Alan Hassenfeld, who was still entangled with Diane Kruger, and said, "Don't try to be clever and end up making a fool of yourself." "No." Michael Eisner shook his head and smiled. "This is a public place. Everyone is respectable. It won't be a big deal." On the other side, Alan Hassenfeld had just begun to immerse himself in Diane Kruger's beauty. After a series of unsuccessful attempts to court her, he quickly discovered something unusual. Recently, because several major film companies were competing for the rights to Transformers, Alan Hassenfeld was invited to many internal parties in Hollywood. Of course, there were some enthusiastic receptions. In the process, he discovered that the beautiful faces that he used to see in movies or on TV were not so unattainable. Some people even took the initiative to approach him after hearing his identity. However, the attitude of the girl in front of him was completely different. Alan Hassenfeld could clearly feel the very formal etiquette she used to treat him. Moreover, in the past, the managers and attendants of female celebrities would tactfully leave after a round of introductions. However, Diane Kruger's manager had no intention of leaving at all. Instead, he looked at him with a bit of vigilance. Aaron Hassenfeld, who was gradually waking up from his lust, sensed these details and slowly realized that something was amiss. Many of the people around him looked like they were watching a good show, making him realize that there was something fishy going on. Although he liked beauty, Alan Hassenfeld was definitely not willing to cause unnecessary trouble. He even acutely sensed that Michael Eisner's motive for bringing him directly to this girl might not be so simple. Aaron Hassenfeld had originally planned to get up and walk away to figure out what was going on. But when he looked at that youthful face that made his heart flutter, he still felt a little indignant. After a slight hesitation, he asked, "Diane, may I ask if you have a boyfriend?" Diane Kruger opened her mouth in a daze. For a moment, she didn't know how to answer. During these days, she clearly felt the special treatment she received. At the same time, she also knew the fundamental reason why she received these preferential treatment. It was because people regarded her as Eric Williams' woman. From last year until now, even without deliberately inquiring, she could feel his omnipresent influence in Hollywood. This powerful influence even allowed her to enjoy the meticulous care of everyone around her just because of some scandals between the two of them. Immersed in this princess-like treatment, unconsciously, even she silently acknowledged her identity. It seemed that she really should be his woman. What's more, there was no harm in being his woman. However, Alan Hassenfeld's sudden question was like a silver needle that came out of nowhere, popping the dream bubble that she had built as if she had hypnotized herself. A trace of fear appeared in her heart. If in the future, the people around her who treated her with respect and took care of her discovered that she had nothing to do with him, what would the result be? Suddenly, she felt as if she was in a free fall, falling. It was the same feeling she had when she woke up from a dream. Heaven, the mortal world, hell. In contrast to Diane Kruger's sudden daze, ICM's agent Susie Dean, who had been standing beside her, heard Alan Hassenfeld's question, and finally understood that this guy in front of her really didn't know anything. It was no wonder he was so entangled. Susie Dean knew about the recent fight over the copyright of Transformers, so she didn't want to cause any unpleasantness with Alan Hassenfeld. Because of their relationship with UTA in the past, Firefly and ICM had been very close over the years. The reason why ICM was able to compete with the two veteran agencies, CAA and WMA, and rapidly expand its client base to nearly 3,000 people in just a few years was inseparable from the support of several film companies in Firefly's system. Kapoor Sid had smoothly become ICM CEO because of this. Many of UTA's agents in ICM even called Eric Williams Big Boss in private, and were proud of it. This showed the influence Eric Williams had on ICM. If this matter affected the ownership of the copyright of Transformers, Diane Kruger and Alan Hassenfeld would be fine. However, her agent, who didn't handle this matter well, would be in trouble. When Susie Dean heard Alan Hassenfeld's question, she thought that this shrewd girl would subtly hint at her relationship with Eric Williams. However, she inexplicably began to stare blankly. Left with no choice, Susie Dean was just about to speak up for her client when she sensed an obvious anomaly in the party hall. It was as though an invisible hourglass had suddenly flipped over. The guests were like grains of sand that were affected by gravity as they quickly gathered at the entrance of the hall. It's Eric Williams. I didn't expect him to come. Let's go over quickly. Maybe we can say hello. Katie, help me look at the eye makeup I just touched up. Is it? Hey, don't go. After a buzz of discussion, everyone quickly realized what had happened. Even some guests who were self-conscious couldn't help but move their feet and turn to where everyone's attention was focused, hoping to be the first to notice Eric when he arrived. Diane Kruger, who was in a daze, immediately woke up when she heard Eric's name. She had been held back by Alan Hassenfeld since she arrived and hadn't been too far away from the entrance. She only turned her head. Although most of her line of sight was blocked by the wall of people, she still caught a glimpse of the figure in the crowd. Susie Dean saw that Alan Hassenfeld's attention was also attracted by this sudden movement. She swallowed the words she was about to say and reached out to pat Diane Kruger. Diane, Mr. Williams is here. Let's go over. Ah, okay. Diane Kruger blurted out subconsciously and panicked again. They hadn't seen each other for months. What if he became cold to her? There were so many people here. Once that happened, many things couldn't be hidden anymore. Looking at the figure surrounded by people, Diane Kruger shrank back a little. She was like a prisoner on the eve of her execution, only hoping to live a little longer. Susie, there are too many people. Let's go over later, Diane Kruger said after hesitating for a while. Susie Dean couldn't possibly know what she was thinking. Seeing that it was a group of men squeezing around Eric, she nodded. Then we'll go over later. In the middle of the crowd, Michael Eisner and Edgar Bronfman, who had taken the initiative to welcome Eric when they heard the announcement, accompanied him on both sides. Although they had a warm smile on their faces, they felt a little uncomfortable. For the past few days, they had been the center of attention, but when the young man beside them appeared, he easily stole all the limelight. In the hall, whether it was Hollywood superstars, famous directors, or gold medal producers, they all rushed forward to greet Eric very eagerly. Since the beginning of the year, Firefly had released the movie production plans intensively. Eric could be said to have a batch of the most popular movies in Hollywood. Firefly had made a large number of directors, actors, and even producers famous over the years. Even the most individualistic film critic couldn't ignore the large number of cooperation opportunities contained in these movies. In addition to these people, the rich people who had attended Hollywood parties in the past could often use their huge wealth to maintain a sense of superiority in front of these Hollywood natives. After all, no matter how glamorous these people seemed on the surface, they were often just pawns in the operation of capital. In the past few days, Edgar Bronfman, who had successfully taken over Universal Pictures, had actually maintained this proud thought. However, Eric's appearance had hit this pride in his heart without a trace. After acquiring MCA, Edgar Bronfman bet almost 70% of Seagram Group's assets on it. But at this time, the entire MCA Group, including Universal, was only worth $7.5 billion according to the transaction price with Panasonic. The latest issue of Business Weekly valued Firefly Group at an astonishing $45 billion, which was more than the combined market value of Time Warner and Viacom, and 6 times the market value of MCA. Just based on the assets of Firefly Group, Eric Williams' net worth reached $33 billion, and his assets outside of Hollywood also exceeded $10 billion. On the list of the 400 richest people in North America published by Forbes magazine, Eric Williams' net worth of $46.5 billion left Bill Gates, who was ranked second, far behind. In front of such a young man, it would be difficult for anyone in the world to find any sense of superiority. Chapter 704. After accompanying Eric around the venue, Edgar Bronfman and Michael Eisner parted ways with him and walked to the other side of the party hall. Looking at Eric, who was still surrounded by a group of people, and feeling that there was obviously less people around him, Edgar Bronfman knew that it was impossible for him to catch up with Firefly in a short time, but he was still very unwilling to give up. He said to Michael Eisner beside him, "Michael, after paying the relevant acquisition fees, Seagram Group still has about $1.5 billion in cash left. Which direction do you think we should expand in next?" Seagram Group's acquisition of MCA was mainly funded by the $9 billion from the sale of DuPont's shares. After paying Panasonic $7.5 billion, they still had $1.5 billion in cash left. Edgar Bronfman originally did not plan to immediately invest this money in Hollywood, but seeing Eric's limitless glory, Edgar Bronfman was envious and unwilling to give up. At the same time, he could not help but have the idea of quickly expanding the Hollywood industry. Michael Eisner could feel Edgar Bronfman's feelings at this time, and he was also feeling the same. He said, "Edgar, you know that Fox and Firefly recently acquired Blue Sky Studio together. Firefly already has 2 animation studios, Pixar and Disney, but they are still sparing no effort to support animation companies outside of Firefly. Also last year, Viacom spent a huge sum of money to acquire Disney's hand-drawn animation team from Firefly. From all these, we can see the future of animated movies. I think we should first set up Universal's animation department." Edgar Bronfman nodded and said, "Do you have a detailed plan? We can imitate the Blue Sky Studio they are supporting this time, and also acquire a relatively good special effects studio. CG special effects and 3D animation are similar in many aspects. Then we can poach some skilled animators from the 2 studios under Firefly. Although Pixar and Disney's salary is very generous, as long as we are willing to pay a high price and put them in important positions, we can definitely poach some talented people." Michael Eisner had been thinking about this for a long time, but this plan would cost a lot of money. 2 years ago, Panasonic was not willing to spend this money at all. Thinking of this, Michael Eisner added, "But Edgar, I need to say in advance that animated movies are not that easy to make. We may need to invest hundreds of millions of US dollars in the early stages. Also, I can't guarantee that the first animated movie will be a big success. This requires enough accumulation." Edgar Bronfman did not lack a long-term vision. Since half of Hollywood was working hard to develop animated movies, if Universal wanted to become bigger and stronger, they could not turn a blind eye to this. He nodded and said, "The funding is not a problem. You can prepare a plan as soon as possible." Eric, who was surrounded by the crowd, did not know what Edgar Bronfman and Michael Eisner were discussing. Even if he knew, he would not be too worried. For a 3D animated movie to be successful, many factors were needed. Creativity, technology, team, funds, and time were all indispensable. In his previous life, after Pixar's Toy Story became a huge success, several other major film companies tried to produce 3D animated movies. However, other than Disney, in the past decade, the only company that could be considered a success was Blue Sky Studio. The long production cycle and high production cost of animated movies were important factors that limited other film studios from developing this business. Even Time Warner quietly gave up after trying to invest in a few animated movies, but to no avail. Fox was stimulated by the success of Toy Story a few years ago and set up their own animation department. Elizabeth specifically mentioned it to Eric. After the deal with Blue Sky Studio was completed, Elizabeth also suggested that Fox's animation team be merged into Blue Sky Studio. Eric did not object at first, but after watching Fox's animation department produce an animated movie called Frozen Planet, he completely gave up the idea. Frozen Planet had nothing to do with Ice Age. It told the story of a space military academy that was attacked by extraterrestrial forces after the nuclear war when mankind entered the space age. The creativity was good, but the animators' standards were terrible. In Eric's opinion, the animation that had been completed was not even as good as Disney's TV animation. Hearing Eric's evaluation, Elizabeth simply dissolved the entire animation department. Of course, The millions of dollars that had been spent on this would definitely be wasted. If Fox's animation department was like this, the situation of other film studios that wanted to make animated movies would not be much different. With a glass of red wine in his hand, Eric patiently dealt with the overly enthusiastic guests around him. At this time, he also realized that his appearance had very unkindly stolen the spotlight that should have belonged to the host of this party. Firefly's Burbank headquarters was only 2 kilometers away from Universal Studios, separated only by a highway. Eric stayed at Firefly's headquarters to discuss the production of The Matrix with the team until 7 o'clock in the evening. When he was about to leave, he remembered that Edgar Bronfman had personally called him a few days ago to invite him, so he decided to come over and join in the fun. However, he did not expect such a situation. After more than 10 minutes, the guests around him gradually dispersed. Diane Kruger waited patiently with a nervous heart. When she saw that the big shots around Eric had finally left, she took a deep breath and tried to put on a nice smile. She lifted the corner of her dress and walked over. However, when Diane Kruger made this move, the other 4 mermaids in the party surrounded Eric almost at the same time. Their current status was personally raised by Eric. There were too many people just now, and they were too weak to squeeze in. Of course, they had to be the first to greet him. Looking at the 5 most dazzling beauties hugging and kissing Eric in succession, while feeling envious, some ordinary customers who thought it was their turn to go up and get acquainted with Eric stopped in their tracks and continued to wait helplessly. "Hey Eric, good evening. Linda, your dress tonight is really beautiful. Cindy, your black dress is also great. Oh, and Christy." After Cindy Crawford hugged Eric, she smiled and said, "Eric, why do you only praise our clothes? Are we not beautiful?" "Of course not. You are all perfect girls that I personally selected." Eric smiled. Chatting with beauties was much more comfortable than being surrounded by a group of men. After greeting Linda Evangelista, Cindy Crawford, Christy Durrington and Tara Banks, he looked at Diane Kruger who was standing outside the 4 of them and seemed to be a little nervous. He stretched out his hand and said, "Diane, what's wrong? Don't you want a hug?" Diane Kruger quickly went forward and hugged him intimately. The girl realized that although Eric's attitude towards them was not cold, if that was all, she was no different from the other 4 girls. In a short moment, Diane Kruger made a bold decision. As soon as Eric let go of her waist, she turned sideways and reached out to hold Eric's arm. During the production of the Victoria's Secret show, Cindy Kruger and the other girls felt that Eric treated Diane Kruger specially. When they saw Diane Kruger's intimate action, they were not surprised at all. However, Eric raised his eyebrows slightly. Although Cindy Kruger knew that she could not be as intimate with Eric as Diane Kruger, she still felt a little unhappy when she saw Diane Kruger's action. She looked at Eric and pretended to ask casually, "Eric, why did you come alone?" Eric had only decided to attend this party on the spur of the moment. He had wanted to bring his female assistant, but Kelly had to go back to have dinner with her daughter, so he had to come alone. He thought that he would meet his women at the party, such as Nicole. Because of the collaboration on The Mummy, Nicole had a close relationship with Worldwide. It was impossible for her not to attend such an occasion. However, Eric had miscalculated. Nicole had attended the party a few days ago. It was impossible for her to attend every party. Of course, she did not come today. Other than Nicole, Eric looked around and didn't find any other woman. However, he could not say this to Cindy Kruger. Eric just reached out and hugged Diane Kruger, who was holding his arm, and said with a smile, "Isn't this my date?" Cindy Kruger was bold. She reached out and held Eric's other arm. "In that case, I'll be your date too." Eric blinked with a naughty expression and said with a smile, "Okay, all 5 of you together are fine." This kind of obvious double entendre caused the girls to show some anger on their faces, but they didn't walk away. In the crowd, Hasbro's CEO, Alan Hassenfeld, did not take the initiative to greet them. He waited very patiently. However, after seeing Eric and Diane Kruger's intimate actions, he gradually understood something. After a while, Alan Hassenfeld took a glass of wine from the waiter's tray and walked toward Eric. The girls around Eric saw someone walking over so insensibly. Although they were unhappy, They took the initiative to make way for him. When Diane Kruger saw Alan Hassenfeld walking over, she could not help but tighten her grip on Eric's arm. Alan Hassenfeld nodded slightly at Diane Kruger and reached out his hand to Eric. "Hello, Mr. Williams." "Hello, Mr. Hassenfeld." Eric reached out and shook his hand. When Alan Hassenfeld heard Eric blurt out his surname, although he had expected it, he was still very surprised. He said, "Mr. Williams, do you know me?" Eric smiled and said, "I don't have the habit of pretending not to know someone." Alan Hassenfeld laughed a few times, but his mind was quickly calculating. Eric Williams knew him. Then, the rumors were most likely true. Recalling the small actions of Edgar Bronfman and Michael Eisner, Alan Hassenfeld turned to Diane Kruger and said, "Miss Kruger, I'm really sorry. I didn't know about your relationship with Mr. Williams. When Edgar and Michael introduced you to me, I thought you were single." Diane Kruger was puzzled by Alan Hassenfeld's sudden words, but she still responded politely, "It's okay, Mr. Bronfman." Diane Kruger didn't understand, but it didn't mean that Eric didn't understand. Although Cindy Crawford didn't know Alan Hassenfeld's identity, she also understood the meaning behind his words. Edgar Bronfman and Michael Eisner had introduced Alan Hassenfeld to Eric's woman. Obviously, they wanted to create a conflict between him and Eric because of the woman. When Eric heard Michael Eisner and the others play such a dirty trick, he was a little displeased. However, he didn't show it. Michael Eisner didn't succeed in driving a wedge between him and Alan Hassenfeld. But at this time, Alan Hassenfeld said this with the idea of giving him a taste of his own medicine. He wanted to create a conflict between him and Michael Eisner. If Firefly and Universal fought over the copyright of Transformers because of this matter, Hasbro would be able to benefit from it. Few people who could become the CEO of a large corporation were fools who would roll up their sleeves and act recklessly after being instigated. Alan Hassenfeld wasn't, Michael Eisner wasn't, and of course, Eric wasn't either. Seeing that Eric's expression didn't change, Alan Hassenfeld didn't know if he didn't understand the meaning of his words or if he did, but he remained calm. After thinking for a while, he probed again. "Mr. Williams, since you know me, Firefly must have been paying attention to Transformers for a long time, right?" Eric said, "Transformers, it's indeed a very interesting toy series. I played with Transformers when I was a child." "Oh, then what do you think of the prospects of developing this toy series into a live-action movie?" Alan Hassenfeld asked. Eric shrugged. "I don't think Transformers has any movie development value now." Alan Hassenfeld frowned. "Mr. Williams, can you tell me your reason?" "Reason?" Eric smiled and said, "After I heard that someone was competing for the copyright of Transformers, I was very interested. So I asked the technical department to do some relevant evaluation. Do you know what the result was?" "I'd like to hear the details." Alan Hassenfeld made a show of listening attentively. Chapter 705. As soon as Alan Hassenfeld's voice fell, another voice sounded behind him. "Eric, do you mind if we also listen to your views on Transformers?" Eric turned his head and saw Michael Eisner and Edgar Bronfman walking side by side. Michael Eisner and Edgar Bronfman noticed that Alan Hassenfeld took the initiative to talk to Eric not far away, so they quickly came over to prevent the two from negotiating about the copyright of Transformers. Although Firefly was indifferent to the copyright of Transformers on the surface, no one could deny that it was the most powerful competitor for the copyright of Transformers. The details of Alan Hassenfeld's contact with Eric made Michael Eisner and Edgar Bronfman feel a sense of crisis. Moreover, if Eric snatched the copyright of Transformers at the Universal Party, they would become the laughingstock of Hollywood. "Of course, Michael." Eric nodded with a smile. Of course, he didn't mind Michael Eisner listening. He even hoped that his next words would spread throughout Hollywood. Following the actions of Michael Eisner and Edgar Bronfman, some guests from other studios who noticed the situation also came over as if nothing had happened. They were also very interested in the copyright of Transformers. Diane Kruger and Cindy Crawford, who were leaning against Eric, found that in just a few minutes, Eric had once again become the focus of the venue. The senior executives of the film company, who had been difficult for them to get in touch with in the past, now surrounded Eric like a myriad of stars surrounding the moon. They were all listening attentively without any airs. The two of them were holding Eric's arm, so it was fine. Linda Evangelina and the other two women were unceremoniously pushed to the periphery of the crowd by these big shots. Their eyes were inevitably filled with envy when they looked at the two of them. Although Diane Kruger and Cindy Crawford knew that these big shots didn't care about them at all, they still inexplicably felt an inexplicable sense of satisfaction and pride in their hearts. Alan Hassenfeld looked at the people around him and Eric's confident expression. He had a bad feeling, and he regretted taking the initiative to talk to Eric. Eric's current posture clearly didn't seem like he was going to speak up for the Transformers. Moreover, with Eric's status in Hollywood, his words would never be lightly ignored. Alan Hassenfeld did not believe that Eric would simply talk nonsense to suppress the value of the Transformers copyright. Sure enough, after patiently waiting for everyone to gather around, Eric said, "When I heard that everyone was recently concerned about the Transformers movie adaptation rights, I also became interested in this toy series and privately considered some production plans. But the final conclusion is that with the current conditions, Transformers doesn't have much adaptation value. If we forcibly make a live-action movie, the cost and risk are very high. If someone hadn't indirectly linked the Transformers movie adaptation rights to Firefly, there wouldn't have been so many people competing for it." 9 out of 10 people didn't believe Eric's words, but they weren't in a hurry to refute. Eric looked around and continued, "According to my vision, if we want to make a live-action movie, the image design of Transformers should be a complex and precise mechanical life made up of hundreds of parts and full of metal texture. These life forms also need to be seamlessly and flexibly transformed between cars and robots. I discussed my ideas in detail with the special effects engineer in the digital field, and came to the conclusion that if we make it according to this idea, the CG special effects of the movie will be more than 10 times more difficult than Jurassic Park, and the production costs will be sky-high." After Eric finished speaking, although Michael Eisner had a smile on his face, he asked very sharply, "Eric, I'm very curious. The difficulty of making Transformers is more than 10 times more difficult than Jurassic Park. How did you calculate this 10 times ? Everyone just took Eric's 10 times as an adjective to describe the difficulty of making Transformers. If Michael Eisner didn't open his mouth, no one would have bothered to chew on his words. However, Michael Eisner suddenly used this point to make things difficult for Eric. Although everyone still had a sincere and curious expression on the surface, they couldn't help but gloat in their hearts. They wanted to see how Eric planned to deal with Michael Eisner's tricky question. To their disappointment, Eric's expression didn't show any signs of anger. When he heard Michael Eisner's question, the smile on his face didn't change. He said, "Michael, regarding the specific software development, technical testing, 3D modeling, and other processes involved in CG special effects, I think you definitely don't know. Let's take the most important image rendering, for example. The special effects engineer in the digital field told me that if I want to achieve the kind of CG effect I need, every frame involved in CG special effects in the movie needs a top-notch rendering workstation to work continuously for 630 hours. Hearing the gasps of surprise around him, Eric smiled and said, "Everyone will definitely think that 630 hours of rendering time is a bit unbelievable, but if you don't believe me, you can call the digital field to verify it. Of course, there's another point. The digital field has just built a large-scale post-production rendering farm in Florida. It has 10,000 rendering servers. If all of them work together, it only takes 3 minutes to render such a frame. This seems insignificant. But don't forget that I'm only talking about one frame. If we assume that this movie has 30 minutes of special effects scenes, then the number of frames involved is 43,200 frames. Even if all the rendering parameters can be done in one step without any testing, it will still take 115 days for the digital field's rendering farm to complete all the work. 2 years ago, Jurassic Park only took about a month for the post-production rendering work, and it used the digital field's rendering farm in Venice Beach that was about to be phased out. If we take into account the difference in computing speed, because of the comprehensive upgrade of the scale and equipment, the rendering farm in Florida should be 8 times faster than the rendering farm in Venice Beach. So there's nothing wrong with me saying that the production difficulty of Transformers is more than 10 times that of Jurassic Park. Michael Eisner's expression was slightly embarrassed. In recent years, CG special effects had been on the rise. Of course, it was impossible for him not to know anything about it. If what Eric said was true, then the current Transformers really had no production value. Even if the producers were willing to pay such a huge amount of post-production rendering costs, the digital field would not be willing to accept it. Every year, the digital field accepted dozens of orders for special effects for movies. It was absolutely impossible for a movie to occupy the rendering farm for 4 months. Moreover, in the whole of Hollywood, only the digital field had enough financial strength to build a large-scale rendering farm. The other second- and third-tier special effects companies often could only rent rendering servers from large companies on a small scale. Michael Eisner was silent. Alan Hassenfeld asked, "Eric, can't you lower the production standards a little?" "Of course you can. I just don't know if the audience will buy it." Eric shrugged and smiled. "I'm a bit of a perfectionist. This is not a good habit when it comes to making movies. So, you can ignore what I said just now. There are definitely cheaper production plans. You can even shoot with a model. This will definitely be cheaper. I'll go to the cinema to take a look." When everyone heard Eric's words, they all criticized him. Since Eric had said so, how could they ignore it? Eric, on the other hand, only cared about killing and not burying. After he finished speaking, he felt a little hungry. He left the people with different thoughts and walked towards the buffet table in the hall. Cindy Crawford and Diane Kruger still followed Eric. Linda Evangelina and the other 2 women, who had just been squeezed out, also followed. Cindy Crawford picked up the plates with Eric and asked, "Eric, do you really need 630 hours?" Eric picked up a grilled prawn on his plate and nodded. "Yes, this involves very complicated technical details, but 600 hours of rendering time is real." Diane Kruger also said, "Doesn't that mean that Transformers will never be able to be made?" Of course not. According to Moore's law in the semiconductor industry, the computing speed of computers will double every 1.5 to 2 years. So, in 10 years, it will only take a little more than 10 hours to render the same frame. By then, other technologies will also develop at the same time. It will be very easy to complete my idea. In 1995, the semiconductor industry had just entered the microprocessor era. The mainstream CPU cores were all 0.35 microns. There was still a long way to go before the nano era. The instructions at the bottom of a computer's CPU were actually a set of zeros and ones issued by millions of transistors. With the development of Moore's law, the number of transistors on a chip of the same size kept doubling, and the CPU's processing speed also correspondingly doubled. 10 years later, it would only take a little more than 10 hours to complete a task, but now it would take more than 600 hours. This limitation was not so easy to break. They could only wait patiently for the development of technology. Therefore, now was not the time to make Transformers at all. Moreover, Eric's repeated mention of the digital domain just now also conveyed another message to those people. That is, in Hollywood, even if you want to make Transformers, it is impossible to bypass the digital domain, because in the entire Hollywood, only the digital domain had the ability to carry out the special effects of Transformers. Although the digital domain had been operating independently for the past few years, and had not rejected any special effects orders from Firefly, this did not mean that Firefly would never do so. As for Industrial Light and Magic, almost all of the CG special effects blockbusters in the past few years were produced by the digital domain. The continuous special effects orders not only brought a large amount of income to the digital domain, but also gave the digital domain enough financial strength to continue to invest in technology research and development. At this time, the digital domain had left Industrial Light and Magic far behind in terms of technology accumulation. Take the rendering farm of the digital domain for example. Firefly had invested $100 million in the rendering farm in Florida for the digital domain. The powerful computing power was enough to support the rendering needs of all the orders under the digital domain. Even if Industrial Light and Magic could squeeze out $100 million to build a rendering farm of the same scale, The income from the CG special effects orders in their hands might not even be enough to support the maintenance and upgrade costs of such a large-scale rendering farm. Eric was thinking about this when Cindy Crawford, who was next to him, heard his words and said, 10 years at most 6 times, how did it become more than 10 hours? Eric was stunned for a moment, then he shook his head and smiled. He looked at the other women and saw that they were obviously puzzled. He could not help but sigh at the mathematical skills of these beautiful women. Diane Kruger was the first to understand. She said, "It doesn't seem to be 6 times. If it's continuously multiplied, it should be 2 to the 6th power, which is, 64 times. Eric, am I right?" "Smart." Eric nodded. He picked up a grilled prawn and handed it to her. "Here your reward." Heh. Diane Kruger smiled happily as she looked at the other girls, especially Cindy Crawford. She couldn't help but look a little smug. Cindy Crawford was clinging to Eric, making her feel very threatened. Cindy Crawford noticed Diane Kruger's gaze and sneered in disdain. How stupid. How many men would like a smart woman? With that thought, Cindy Crawford's expression already showed a little resentment. She extended the plate in front of Eric and said softly, "Eric, I want one too." Okay. Eric picked up a grilled prawn and put it on Cindy Crawford's plate. Seeing that the other 3 women also extended their plates, he did not mind. He picked up a grilled prawn and joked, "Why don't we take away all the grilled prawns on this plate?" Seeing that Eric was about to pick up the entire plate, the women quickly stopped him and laughed. "Haha, don't, we'll be laughed at." After eating some food and dancing with the women for a while, Eric noticed that the CEO of Hasbro, Alan Hassenfeld, left the party not long after talking to him. He also had the intention to leave. However, looking at Diane Kruger and Cindy Crawford, who were clinging to him, as well as the other 3 women's expectant eyes, Eric could only say, "Cindy, I'm going home." "Eric, I haven't been to the Sharphorn Manor yet. Can you take me there?" Cindy Crawford said boldly, completely ignoring Diane Kruger on the other side. Chapter 706. Countless pairs of eyes in the hall stared at them intentionally or unintentionally. If he took the 5 beauties with him, it would be too ostentatious. Faced with the tempting eyes of the girls, Eric could only refuse. "It's too late today, but I'm off tomorrow. You can come over if you're free." "Really? Then it's a deal." Cindy Crawford was the first to respond again, and the other girls followed suit. Eric smiled and nodded. He looked at Diane Kruger, whose eyes were flashing with disappointment, and said, "Diane, let's go." Diane Kruger was stunned. After hearing Eric's words, she thought that Eric would not take any of them back. Just as she was worrying about her gains and losses, she heard Eric's flat tone. His tone did not carry any command or request, nor did it have the anxiety of a man inviting a girl home for the night for the first time. It was completely like a normal daily conversation, as if everything was so natural. Diane Kruger was hesitating whether she should be a little reserved, but when she felt the envious eyes of the other girls, she immediately gave up any reservations that might backfire. She intimately reached out to hold Eric's hand, and a beautiful smile appeared on her delicate face. She nodded and said, "Okay." Eric reached out and hugged the girl, and said goodbye to Cindy Crawford and the other girls. Then he walked to the host of the party to say goodbye. These etiquette were indispensable. Looking at Eric's departure, the remaining 4 girls felt that the men around them who wanted to strike up a conversation with them had lost interest almost at the same time. To be able to climb to their current position in the fashion industry, they were all very realistic. Although most of the men around them had prominent positions in various industries, even if they tried their best to help them, the help they brought was not necessarily comparable to the help Eric gave them with his little finger. They had just seen Eric's influence in Hollywood, and even in the fashion industry where their careers focused, the strong attention of the Victoria's Secret fashion show had made the 40 Victoria's Secret angels who participated in the Victoria's Secret fashion show become wildly sought after endorsement candidates by businesses all over the world. Many media outlets predicted that the Victoria's Secret angels would monopolize the best brand endorsement opportunities in the industry in the next few years. There was still more than half a year before the second Victoria's Secret fashion show. The 40 Victoria's Secret angels had become the focus of competition among the major modeling agencies in the world. Unless Eric personally intervened, the Victoria's Secret angels from the previous show, who had come from weaker modeling agencies, were likely to be eliminated. Even the positions of the 5 Victoria's Secret spokespersons were coveted. The tabloids had reported more than once that one of the 5 of them would be replaced by the Victoria's Secret project team. In this case, the best way to stabilize his position at the top of the fashion pyramid was to do his best to hold on to Eric, this super thick thigh. Looking at Eric, Edgar Bronfman and Michael Eisner leaving the party hall, Cindy Crawford politely declined an invitation to dance. She raised her wrist to look at the exquisite Patek Philippe and said, "It's almost 10 o'clock. It seems that I have to go back. Maybe I should go to Rodeo Avenue to pick out clothes for tomorrow. Linda, do you want to come?" "Of course." Linda Evangelines placed the half-empty glass of wine in her hand on the tray of a passing waiter and said, "The Chanel store should be closed by now, but I happen to know their manager, so I can pick out the clothes with just a call." Eric left alone with Diane Kruger, making the girls who were not so harmonious in private feel inexplicably united. Christy Durrington also came over and said in a slightly sour tone, "What can a little girl mean? Doesn't he understand that big sisters are more interesting?" Cindy Crawford chuckled and said in a low voice, "Don't you know? He likes big sisters." "Of course we know." Linda Evangelines joined the conversation and said with a smile, "Maybe we're not old enough." "Ha." Amidst her laughter, Cindy Crawford glanced at Tara Banks, who was leaning over. Due to her skin color, although they wouldn't deliberately distance themselves from her, they wouldn't get too close to this black pearl in the past. However, at this moment Cindy Crawford said, "Tara, I heard that Naomi Campbell invited Edward Razek to dinner last week. You have to be careful." In the Western world where racial discrimination was everywhere, the fashion circle could not accommodate 2 dazzling black pearls at the same time. Tara Banks could understand this, but she was not experienced enough. Hearing the conversation between the girls, although they were teasing on the surface, they were full of a sense of crisis. She said, "I don't think there's a need to be so worried. Didn't we all sign a contract?" Cindy Crawford showed a disdainful smile and said, "Tara, I also signed a contract with Warner's Fair Game last year, but in the end the female lead was still changed." Thinking of this, Cindy Crawford showed a faint resentment again, but it was only for a moment, and she quickly calmed down. She originally wanted to change her career to film, mainly because she wanted to change her career quickly before her fame in the fashion circle declined. However, after the Victoria's Secret show, she, who was on the verge of retirement, immediately reached the peak of her career again. As long as she could hold on to the contract with Victoria's Secret and stabilize her position in the circle, her annual endorsement income in the fashion circle would not be lower than most of the A-list actresses in Hollywood. After chatting for a while, the 4 girls also left the party together, making many men at the party feel regretful. Eric left the party with Diane Kruger. Just as the car drove out of Universal Studios, he unexpectedly received a call from Hasbro's CEO, Alan Hassenfeld, who wanted to set up a meeting to talk about Transformers in person. Recently, Eric had been busy with several films. The next 2 days happened to be the weekend, and the next Monday was March 27th, the date of the 67th Academy Awards. Eric did not plan to attend the awards ceremony, and since he had a few days off, he casually made an appointment at 10 o'clock in the morning the next day. Eric knew that his words at the party had made Alan Hassenfeld completely realize the reality. If they wanted to start filming Transformers, it was destined to be a film with a big investment and a big budget. It was impossible for a second or third-tier Hollywood film company to produce and distribute such a big project. Hasbro could only choose from the 7 major film companies. And among the 7 major film companies, only Firefly could provide more guarantee for the movie version of Transformers. Of course, Hasbro could force other film companies to choose, but if they failed, the movie version of the world-class brand of toys would be completely ruined. Of course, Alan Hassenfeld knew what to choose between the 2 of them. Although the original plan was to let Fox take the copyright, Since so many changes had happened, Eric decided that it was safer to take the Transformers series under Firefly. The next morning, Eric habitually woke up early. He was not in a hurry to get up. Lying on his side with his chin propped up, he carefully admired the charming face beside him. Perhaps keenly feeling the man's gaze, Diane Kruger's eyelashes fluttered a few times, and she opened her eyes. "Good morning." Eric leaned over and kissed the seductive face. "Good morning, Eric." Diane Kruger nodded shyly. Eric reached out and pressed a button on the bedside. In the spacious circular bedroom, the curtains quietly slid open, and the morning light rushed in unscrupulously. It was all white outside the window, and as far as the eye could see, there was a faint mist. The sudden light made Diane Kruger even more shy. She shrank into the blanket, but also curiously stuck her head out and carefully looked around. "Do you want to take a look?" Eric said. "Although it's foggy, you should still be able to see around. The view here is pretty good." Diane Kruger had long seen pictures of Freedom City in magazines, and knew that this bedroom was like a flying saucer sitting at the highest point of this streamlined villa. However, when she first saw this villa, she never thought that one day she would wake up in this bedroom. Seeing the girl nod, Eric got up and quickly put on his trousers and a shirt. He looked around. Diane Kruger's wine-red dress from last night was not in the bedroom. Eric had experience in this regard. He opened the closet and quickly took out a white shirt and a loose casual t-shirt. He raised them and smiled at the girl who was still huddled in the blanket. "Which one do you want to wear?" Diane Kruger looked around and pointed at the t-shirt in Eric's left hand. "This one." Eric handed the t-shirt over. Only then did Diane Kruger get up. Under Eric's gaze, she blushed and put on the loose t-shirt on her naked body. She had casually thrown her underwear in the bathroom when she took a shower last night. Now, she was too embarrassed to ask Eric to get it for her. After getting up, Diane Kruger looked at the loose t-shirt on her body and thought for a moment. She pointed at Eric's closet and asked with a questioning look in her eyes, "Can I?" Eric nodded and said, "Up to you." The girl quickly found a brown man's leather belt. She hung it for a moment and tied it around her waist. The loose t-shirt immediately turned into a lady's dress. Eric looked at the girl's actions and thought to himself that she was indeed a well-dressed alien from the past. In the blink of an eye, a t-shirt had turned into a long dress full of charm. The floor of the bedroom was slightly cold, but it was very comfortable to walk barefoot on. The two of them walked to the window on the south side. The sea was foggy, but they could still see the dark sea for several kilometers. In the east, a red light penetrated the mist, indicating that it was another good day. "Actually, the scenery here is the most beautiful in the evening. It's not that interesting now. Let's go over there." Eric held Diane Kruger's hand and walked to the north side of the bedroom. The plot of land in the Sharphorn Manor was already much higher than the surrounding area. The Freedom City increased the difference even further. Other than the hillside in the distance that couldn't be seen clearly in the mist, the nearby buildings within several kilometers appeared in their vision. Diane Kruger stood by the window and leaned in Eric's arms. She looked at the buildings that seemed to be under her feet. Looking at them from the height, it gave her the feeling of looking down on all living things. The two of them stood there and chatted softly for a while. Eric even gave Diane Kruger some of the Hollywood celebrities who lived in the area with great interest. At 9 o'clock in the morning, a few luxury cars appeared at the entrance of the Sharphorn Manor. Cindy Crawford and the other girls had set off early from downtown Los Angeles and rushed to the Sharphorn Manor. The girls went around the manor's corridor to the Freedom City. After parking the car, they walked to the villa together. The person who opened the door was Diane Kruger, who was still wearing the t-shirt from the morning. When the girl saw the four of them, she felt a faint sense of superiority in her heart, but she didn't show it. However, it was impossible for the shrewd Cindy and the other girls not to see it. After a passionate hug on the surface, Cindy Crawford couldn't wait to ask, "Diane, where's Eric?" "We just had breakfast. He's reading the newspaper on the balcony." Diane Kruger deliberately emphasized the word, "we," and then led Cindy and the other girls into the villa. The girls lampooned inwardly, but they maintained their smiles on the surface. Linda Evangelista even affectionately hugged Diane Kruger's shoulder and whispered with a smile, asking her how she felt last night. Diane Kruger wasn't that thick-skinned. She blushed when Linda Evangelina said a few words. They chatted in a low voice as they walked through the spacious hall and came to the balcony on the south side of the villa. At this time, the morning mist had gradually dissipated. The sunlight passed through the last wisp of mist and sprinkled on the sparkling swimming pool on the balcony. The green water in the pool was like a huge piece of jade. Eric was wearing a white shirt and khaki casual pants. He leaned lazily on the deck chair beside the pool with his legs crossed and was flipping through today's Los Angeles Times. When he saw Cindy and the other girls coming over, he stood up and hugged them one by one with a smile. "I thought you would come close to noon. So early. Have you had breakfast?" "No, Eric. What do you think we should do?" Cindy Crawford recalled that Diane Kruger had deliberately mentioned that she and Eric had breakfast together, so she said this. Eric shrugged and said with a smile, "There's food in the kitchen. You can get it yourselves." As he said that, Cindy and the other girls didn't leave to eat. Looking at the spacious pool on the balcony, Cindy Crawford suddenly said, "Eric, can we swim here?" Eric nodded. "Of course." Chapter 707. Women were always very troublesome, especially beautiful women. After getting Eric's permission, Cindy Couplet and Cindy Couplet began to dress up. Crawford and the other women walked into the changing room behind them and changed into sexy bikinis. The red wine, drinks, and snacks in the villa were also collected and moved to the terrace. The women even took out the stereo in the living room. With the music playing, it was like a mini party on the terrace. At the end of March, the temperature in Los Angeles barely rose to about 20 degrees. It was not a good time for swimming, but the temperature was never a problem for women who loved to look beautiful. Eric leaned lazily on the deck chair beside the swimming pool, looking at the 5 beautiful women playing in the pool. He enjoyed it very much. After a while, Linda Couplet and Cindy Couplet arrived. Evangeline Linda swam to Eric's side and leaned half of her body on the edge of the pool. Looking at Eric, who was still wearing the same shirt and trousers, she asked, "Eric, why don't you come with me?" Eric looked at the delicate face that was slightly neutral because of the short hair and smiled. "Do you have a goldfish at home?" Linda Couplet? Evangelina put her chin on her smooth arm and shook her head in confusion. "I don't have any at home, but Christy likes to raise them." Eric raised his head at the beauties in the pool and smiled mischievously. "What do you think will happen if you put a shark into a goldfish bowl?" Noticing Linda Couplet, the other 4 women also swam over, but they all copied Linda Couplet's actions. Evangeline was standing in a row beside the pool. She happened to hear Eric's words and giggled. "Cindy? Mr. Shark, you can come down and try. See if you can eat us," Croft said with a provocative or teasing look. Eric did not expect her to be so bold. The hint was too obvious. However, after calculating the time, Eric shook his head. "Not now. I have a guest at 10 o'clock. Cindy Couplet? Claude and the other women were confused. Diane Krug happened to be next to Eric last night and said, "Is that Alan Hassenfeld?" "Yes, that's him." Eric nodded. However, the copyright of Transformers involved a lot of things, and Eric did not want to discuss it too much. He took the initiative to change the topic. "Aren't you going to attend the Oscar Awards ceremony the day after tomorrow? How are your preparations?" All the girls realized that Eric wanted to change the topic, so they didn't ask. "Linda?" Evangeline Linda said. "I've been preparing for it for a long time." "Ha, I never thought that I would be on the stage of the Oscars one day." As they chatted, seeing that Eric had no intention of getting into the water, the girls also got out of the pool. Eric admired the perfect bodies in front of him that made men's blood boil. He thoughtfully picked up the towels beside him and handed them to each of them. After drying their bodies, a few reclining chairs were lined up on both sides of Eric. The warm sunlight that was close to 10 o'clock shone on their bodies, making them feel very comfortable. Soon, the women revealed a lazy look, just like cats enjoying their owner's caress. Eric went to the stereo and changed the music to a soothing tune. He walked back to his chair and lay down. He asked, "What are you going to do after the Oscars?" "We'll do whatever the agency gives us. But until September, We'll be free most of the time. Linda Evangeline, who was lying on the left side of Eric, said. We'll be busy in September. We'll have to fly to the 4 major fashion weeks and the Victoria's Secret show. We'll be busy until November, and then we'll be free again until the autumn and winter fashion weeks in February and March next year. Cindy? Crawford couldn't snatch the position next to Eric because of Linda's presence. Evangeline Linda, who was supporting her curvy body, poked her head out and asked, Eric, do you have any jobs for us? In order to maintain the popularity of the Victoria's Secret Angels, in addition to the Victoria's Secret show, the Firefly Group had been constantly providing media exposure opportunities for them. This was the main reason why the Victoria's Secret Angels were so popular in the modeling circle. However, these opportunities added together were not necessarily more valuable than the ones provided by Eric. So, realizing the meaning of Eric's words, Cindy? Crawford couldn't wait to ask. Eric's answer didn't disappoint them. He said, Yes, I've been thinking about it since last year when I was preparing for the Victoria's Secret show. To put it simply, it's a model election reality show. The contestants will compete for a lucrative Victoria's Secret Angel contract through various stages. Diane Kruger, who was on the right side of Eric. Kruger said, It sounds like a modeling competition held by an agency. Of course it's different. Eric shook his head. The program I want to create is not a competition in essence, but a reality show. Since it's a show, of course I'll choose something that the audience is interested in to show them. My plan is to choose a more experienced supermodel as the host, and invite some well-known celebrities in the fashion industry to be the judges. In each episode, I'll set up various interesting and professional stages. Through a very intense elimination mode, I'll choose a winner from a batch of contestants and get the final reward contract. After Eric finished speaking, Tara Banks looked at him. Banks suddenly said, Eric, are you saying that it's like Survivor? Eric looked at Tara Banks with interest. Banks glanced at him and nodded with a smile. Yeah, just like Survivor. Looking at the pairs of beautiful eyes around him that seemed to be burning with eagerness, Eric immediately poured some cold water on them. He said, However, this is a more professional reality show. The ratings definitely can't be compared to Survivor. Christy? Doington asked. Then Eric, what do you think the ratings of this reality show will be? Eric shook his head and said, I can't guarantee that. Before a show is officially broadcast, no one can accurately predict its ratings. Cindy? Crawford also asked, Will it be broadcast on ABC? Eric shook his head and said, No, any TV show has a fixed audience. Most of the shows broadcast by ABC are aimed at audiences of all ages. And this show, for the time being, let's call it America's Top Model. America's Top Model's audience is mainly aimed at young audiences between the ages of 16 and 28, especially female audiences who are very interested in fashion. So after the production is completed, Firefly will sell the show to UPN, WB, MTV, and other TV stations with young audiences. In his previous life, America's Top Model was broadcast on the CW. In fact, it was established after the merger of Paramount's UPN and Time Warner's WB, two public TV stations. However, even if history didn't change, it should be 10 years later. Cindy? A few years ago, Crawford hosted a fashion show on MTV, Home of Fashion, so she was clear about the situation of these television stations. Although the ratings of these television stations were generally not high, because the audience was very concentrated, it was convenient for advertisers to advertise to specific targets. Therefore, their popular television programs were also very profitable. If America's Top Model could become a reality show on the same level as Survivor, on these niche television stations, then this show would definitely cause a sensation. If she could win the position of host, not only would she receive a generous reward, but more importantly, through the exposure of this reality show, she would be able to further raise her status in the industry. Therefore, she remembered that Eric just said that he wanted to choose a supermodel with a lot of experience in the circle as the host. Cindy? Crawford's eyes couldn't help but flicker, looking at Linda Costa beside her. She couldn't help but be a little vigilant. The most senior person in the supermodel circle was undoubtedly Linda Gomez. Evangeline Linsta, who can be said to be the first supermodel in the fashion industry, and Christina Lindsta. Duington's qualifications seemed to be deeper than hers. Although Tara, Banks and Diane? On the surface, Krug didn't seem to be much of a competitor, but no one knew if Eric would have other ideas. After all, what if he had to choose Tara, Banks or Diane? As the host, no one could stop Krug. Cindy? Crawford's thoughts were so, and the expressions of the other girls also changed slightly. Eric didn't feel the changes in the girls' thoughts. He was suddenly interested and continued. Although the ratings of America's Top Model can't be compared to Survivor, and Who Will Become a Millionaire, the production cost is also very low. The main cost is actually the appearance fee of the host and guests, and the requirements for the shooting location are not high. I have thought about it. As long as we can gain a foothold in the TV station, through broadcasting rights, videotape distribution, and overseas copyright distribution, it will be easy to achieve profits. Moreover, this kind of low-cost reality show has a very big advantage. As long as there is a market, it can be produced continuously. 10, 20, or even 30 seasons will not be a problem. When the 5 girls heard Eric's words, their little hearts almost jumped at the same time. The short career lifespan of models had always been the biggest problem for them. Under normal circumstances, even if they were supermodels, once they were over 30 years old, even if they were still as beautiful as flowers, they would gradually be replaced by the new generation. If they could get the host position of a longevity reality show that could produce dozens of seasons, it was almost equivalent to getting an iron rice bowl. Even if the pay of the show was not so high, as long as they could maintain their fame through it, they could still get a steady stream of income through other channels. Eric picked up the juice next to him and drank a few mouthfuls. When he was about to continue, the phone on the wall beeped a few times. It turned out to be Alan. Hassenfeld had arrived. Eric said a few words into the phone, then turned to the girls on the lounge chairs and said, "You guys continue to play, I'm going to meet the guest." "Cindy?" Klaus said. "Eric, do you need me to help you?" "Oh no." Eric shook his head and refused. The girls just knew that Eric didn't want them to know too much about the Transformers, so they didn't insist. However, after Eric pushed open the glass door not far away and left, the atmosphere on the terrace suddenly became obviously cold. 5 pairs of eyes inadvertently looked at each other, and it was obvious that there was a touch of hostility in each other's eyes. There could only be one host of America's Top Model. The reason why the girls could maintain a harmonious state of fake best friends was mainly because they were the spokespersons of Victoria's Secret. Their current status was similar, but if the host position of America's Top Model fell to any of them, this delicate balance would be broken almost immediately. "Alan?" Hassenfeld parked the car in front of the Freedom City Villa. After getting out of the car, he couldn't help but look around, especially at the Freedom City that was frequently ridiculed by the media as an alien aircraft because of last year's Men in Black. His eyes were full of envy. Although the market value of Hasbro reached $2 billion, after more than half a century of development, Hasbro, like many long-established companies, had become a publicly owned company. Although the Hassenfeld family still controlled the toy company, it was no longer the largest shareholder, and the family wealth was only $500 million. Hassenfeld's personal wealth was less than $100 million. Therefore, at this time, looking at this dream villa that many rich people coveted, he could only be a little envious. Perhaps it was this gap in wealth that made Alan? Hassenfeld's confidence in his heart weakened unconsciously. He was also nervous about the next negotiations about the Transformers copyright. The door of the villa not far away opened. Seeing Eric walk out, Hassenfeld hurriedly went up to him. The two greeted each other, then Eric took him into the villa and went directly to the study. "Sit down on the sofa, Alan?" Hassenfeld saw Eric personally go to the side to make coffee and said, "Eric, why don't you let the servants do these things?" "Oh, I prefer silence. I'm not used to people wandering around in front of me, so they usually stay outside and don't come in on their own initiative. Everyone has their own unique personal preferences." Hearing Eric say this, Alan? Hassenfeld nodded slightly and didn't ask anything more. After making coffee and pouring a cup for each of them, Eric sat down on the sofa and said, So, Alan, I think it's better for us to be direct. Regarding the Transformers, what are Hasbro's final conditions for cooperation? Alan? Hassenfeld was stunned. He put down the coffee cup in his hand, hesitated for a moment, and said, Eric, about what you said last night, I want to ask first. If the Transformers are handed over to Firefly, when can you officially start production? Chapter 708. The best time to make Transformers was of course 10 years later. However, if he said that now, Eric believed that Alan Hassenfeld would probably leave on the spot. 5 years. Eric thought for a moment and said to Alan Hassenfeld. This sentence was not entirely to deal with the other party. The production time was brought forward to about 2000, and there were not many problems with the technology. It was just that the costs would be higher. I have several high-tech companies in my hands, so I still have a full understanding of this. According to the current speed of technological development, Transformers will start production in 5 years, and the costs will be within the range of risks we can afford. Although Eric's words last night did not completely dampen the enthusiasm of the film companies who hoped to get the copyright of Transformers, the impact was obvious. Before Alan Hassenfeld came in the morning, he called several senior executives of the film companies who had been negotiating during this period of time to sound them out. The tone of the other party was no longer as eager as before. Alan Hassenfeld understood that these people were not no longer interested in the copyright of Transformers, but because of Eric's words, they had scruples. Since Eric publicly suppressed the copyright of Transformers at the party, no matter what his intentions were, his intention was almost certain that he did not want others to compete for the copyright of Transformers. Since Eric did this when Transformers was still in the stage of fighting for the copyright, it was hard to guarantee that he would not do something bad during the production of the film. Therefore, the best partner for Hasbro at this time was only Firefly. Of course, they could also hold the copyright of Transformers tightly in their hands, but this was not in the fundamental interests of Hasbro. After Eric finished speaking, Alan Hassenfeld did not waste any more time. He said, Eric, Firefly has always been Hasbro's most anticipated partner. We have thought about it in detail. If you can be the director of this film, Firefly only needs to pay a copyright licensing fee of $5 million. However, Hasbro hopes to invest together. Our request is not high. We only need 30% of the investment rights. Alan, I can't guarantee that I can be the director of this film, but I will definitely be the producer myself. As for Hasbro wanting to participate in the investment, it is not impossible to consider. Eric replied without hesitation. It wasn't that he couldn't guarantee it, but that he didn't want to be the director of Transformers. Eric's positioning for the Transformers series was to be a super popcorn movie, with all kinds of special effects, all kinds of explosions, all kinds of exhilaration, and that was enough. In his previous life, Transformers had never been rated by the media or the filmmakers because of this. Eric still cared about his reputation as a director. Therefore, the director's position of Transformers should be handed over to Explosive Shell, who didn't care about the ridicule of the filmmakers. The two of them bargained back and forth for a while before they finally reached an agreement. Hasbro licensed the movie adaptation rights of Transformers to Firefly Group for $3 million for a period of 10 years. Firefly promised to develop a movie version in 5 years, and Hasbro could invest up to 25% of the film. What Alan Hassenfeld really cared about was not the licensing fee of a few $1,000,000, so he did not insist when Eric lowered the licensing price to $3 million. However, he was a little surprised that Eric allowed Hasbro to participate in 25% of the investment. During the process of contact with other film companies, the main contradiction in the negotiations was the investment ratio that Hasbro participated in. At first, Hasbro whimsically wanted to invest in the live-action film with their partners, but they soon realized that the major film companies would never agree to such a condition. Before Alan Hassenfeld came, the bottom line in his heart was actually 20%. Eric readily gave him a 25% investment ratio, which even made him have the thought that if he had known earlier, he wouldn't have wasted so much time with the other companies. Eric saw Alan Hassenfeld's expression and laughed in his heart. Even if the idea buried in the bottom of his heart did not succeed, Hasbro would have a taste of the Hollywood financial system in the future. The specific contract terms would definitely need to be discussed in detail by both parties. But since the result had been determined, Eric was more enthusiastic and specially opened a bottle of champagne as a simple celebration. Alan Hassenfeld held the champagne in his hand and looked forward to the future of the Transformers movie with Eric. He seemed to inadvertently bring up another topic. Eric, with all due respect, Firefly's development of movie peripheral products in recent years is far from the limit of those popular movies. Take the development of several 3D animated movies released by Disney as an example. Firefly itself produced some of the peripheral products, but these products were limited to the fixed sales circle of Disneyland and Disney stores. And for the peripheral products that Firefly can't produce, your extensive licensing model of cooperation with anyone who applies is actually a great waste of the brand. Firefly was actually aware of this problem internally. However, in the past few years, both Firefly and Disney focused on the movie business. After annexing Disney, Eric launched the acquisition of the television network without stopping. During this period, he had not had much energy to deal with this matter. Katzenberg had begun to seek a solution. Eric had also recently seen several relevant documents. The brand operations department was discussing a packaged image licensing agreement with the fast food giant KFC. KFC would pay $100 million a year for the license to print cartoon images in Disney movies on the tableware of its fast food restaurants. As long as this cooperation plan was formed, Firefly could continue to extend this as a template and develop more efficient brand operations strategies. However, Eric certainly wouldn't say this to Alan Hassenfeld. He also understood the intention of Alan Hassenfeld's words. He just nodded in agreement. At the same time, some other thoughts came to his mind. Sure enough, Alan Hassenfeld said again, "Eric, in this case, I think, why don't we have in-depth cooperation in this area? Firefly is a media group. I guess you will definitely not choose to expand your Disney stores. This is not the focus of Firefly's business. Then, Hasbro can completely fill the gap in the market outside Disneyland and Disney stores. We not only have a perfect product distribution system in North America, but we also have a very deep market expansion in Europe and Asia." Eric made a very interested look, but regretfully said, "Alan, after hearing what you said, I very much hope that we can cooperate, but I have to discuss this kind of thing with the management before I can decide. However, no matter what the outcome of the discussion is, I will give you an answer as soon as possible." Alan Hassenfeld didn't expect Eric to give any answer on the spot on this matter, but Eric's intention also made him very excited. In the process of rapid expansion in the 1980s, Hasbro often used very clumsy mergers and acquisitions in order to enrich their toy product range. The strong rise of Firefly in the CG special effects blockbusters and 3D animation movies in recent years made Hasbro see another development route. If they could reach a close cooperation with Firefly Group, then the CG special effects movies and 3D animation movies produced by Firefly would bring a steady stream of toy images to Hasbro. Hasbro had been eyeing the toy development of movies such as Toy Story, Jurassic Park, and The Lion King for a long time. However, Firefly had been very conservative in cooperation in this area in the past few years, so they had never had a chance. With this intention reached, Alan Hassenfeld was satisfied. He looked at the time. It was just past 11 o'clock, and there was still some time before lunch. Eric didn't mean to ask him to stay for lunch, so Alan Hassenfeld took the initiative to leave. After sending Alan Hassenfeld away, Eric didn't return to the Villa Terrace to enjoy life. Instead, he dialed Katzenberg's phone. Alan Hassenfeld's cooperation proposal also made him realize another opportunity. Just look at how valuable Firefly's movie peripherals were. KFC was willing to pay $100 million a year for the licensing fee for Disney cartoon images. Eric originally suggested that Fox buy Hasbro. In addition to the copyright of Transformers, Hasbro also had a good toy production and sales system. Fox wasn't willing to take this risk, so Eric already had the idea of buying Hasbro. However, because of the need for a large investment in the high-tech industry in recent years, Eric didn't have enough funds to buy Hasbro for the time being. Right now, Alan Hassenfeld's cooperation proposal was almost equivalent to Hasbro taking the initiative to come to his door. As long as they could reach a close cooperation relationship with Hasbro, with the strong status of Firefly's movie brand image, the world-class toy giant would definitely gradually rely on Firefly's brand image. At the same time, all contracts had a term. Eric predicted that Firefly would probably be able to recoup a large amount of funds during the peak of the internet bubble in 2000. At that time, they would also have enough strength to buy Hasbro. In that case, Firefly only needed to sign a 5-year contract with Hasbro. In these 5 years, the closer the cooperation between Hasbro and Firefly, the stronger their dependence on Firefly would be. When the contract expired, Firefly would take advantage of the situation to launch an acquisition bid. Hasbro, who was already firmly tied to Firefly Group, naturally knew what to choose. Or rather, they had no other choice. Through the phone, Lujo told Katzenberg his thoughts. Katzenberg also agreed. He was in high spirits and said that he would immediately convene the management of Firefly to discuss this matter. Eric hung up the phone and looked at the time. It was 11:30. Convening a meeting close to dinner time. Well, anyway, the resentment will definitely not fall on me. After secretly complaining about a certain workaholic, Eric called Elizabeth again and briefly told her what just happened. Elizabeth had already heard about what happened last night. Although there was some regret in her tone, things unexpectedly escalated to this point. This ending was actually the best. After all, if Eric didn't do it himself, Fox's chances of snatching the copyright of Transformers alone were not high. After the 2 phone calls, Eric returned to the villa's balcony and saw a few women walking towards him with a strange look. He smiled and said, "Everyone, it's already noon, get ready to eat." Wow. Splash. There was the sound of water. Before Eric finished speaking, he was quickly lifted up by the 5 women and thrown into the swimming pool. After choking on a few mouthfuls of water, Eric stabilized his body on the surface of the water. Hearing a few splashes, the 5 women laughed and jumped into the water one after another. They also shouted at him provocatively, "Hey Mr. Shark, you left us hanging for so long. This is your punishment." Eric wiped the water stains on his face and pretended to be angry at Cindy Crawford. He quickly swam towards her and said, "In that case, prepare to be punished." Wow, haha. Run away, run away. After struggling for a while, Eric finally caught a warm and soft body. In order to prevent her from escaping, his hands slightly pushed the woman out of the water and pressed her to the side of the swimming pool. Shaking his wet hair, Eric opened his eyes and saw Linda Evangelista. Linda Evangelista didn't have the slightest consciousness of being a captive. Instead, she stretched out 2 straight long legs and boldly wrapped them around Eric's body. Her eyes were bright and hot. Just as Eric's hands were about to move, he remembered something. Staring at Linda Evangelista, he asked, "Linda, I remember that you should have been married a long time ago, right?" Linda Evangelista divorced her husband 2 years ago. However, at this time, she didn't have the slightest intention to explain. Licking her lips, she looked at Eric provocatively and said, "What's wrong? Don't you dare?" Since the woman in front of him didn't mind, of course, Eric didn't act pretentious. Instead, he felt a little hot in his heart. The other women soon widened their eyes and exclaimed. Once the door of desire was opened, it was often difficult to close. Until a new Monday morning, when the Oscar ceremony was in the evening, Cindy Crawford happened to forget to inform her agent of her whereabouts. Her agent was so anxious that she almost jumped to her feet and spent a lot of effort to contact her. At the same time, the 5 women realized that they had something more important to do, so they hurriedly left the Pointed Horn Manor. Chapter 709. After a few months of hustle and bustle, the 1995 awards season finally came to an end with the arrival of the 67th Oscar Awards ceremony. Under the influence of Eric's Butterfly, this year's Oscars was very different from his previous life. Forrest Gump, which was praised by Americans as a modern historical landscape, was delayed. Pulp Fiction, the benchmark of independent films, was brought forward. The Shawshank Redemption, the biggest gem in Oscar history, had not been filmed yet. Despite all the changes, the attention of this year's Oscars was no less than any of the previous ones. The battle between Saving Private Ryan and Braveheart had been hyped by the media for months. Last year's Victoria's Secret show, the 5 Angel spokespersons would present the awards at the same time. A small man who always wore large-rimmed glasses and looked weird, after experiencing a scandal a few years ago, once again swept the main nominations with bullets across Broadway. Of course, he would definitely not attend. Most importantly, this year's Oscars was very likely to produce the first Best Female Director in the history of the Oscars. This female director's work for the award was a blood-boiling war film. March 27, 5 p.m. Sacred Civic Auditorium, Los Angeles. ABC's live red carpet broadcast began on time. Outside the Sacred Civic Auditorium, movie fans who were lucky enough to get seats on both sides of the red carpet excitedly watched the increasing number of stars on the red carpet, looking forward to supporting their idols. Tom Hanks, Morgan Freeman, John Travolta, Tom Cruise, Helen Mirren, Susan Sarandon, Judy Foster, Winona Reed. Whenever the familiar whole appeared on the red carpet, it would cause waves of cheers. A limousine slowly stopped at the end of the red carpet. This was Catherine's first time attending the Oscar Awards ceremony. Before Saving Private Ryan, although Shock Point, Thunderbolt Blue Angel, and other films had attracted the attention of the industry, because the topics of discussion of these films were not favorable, they had not received any decent nominations. The limousine was arranged by her agency. It was a stretch Lincoln. She was the only one sitting in the limousine, which seemed a bit empty. She inadvertently glanced at the sea of people outside the window, and suddenly became nervous. She had never been used to public occasions like this. The door was pulled open. Catherine hesitated for a moment, but still stepped out of the limousine and stepped on the red carpet, tightly holding the handbag in her hand. In the end, she chose the light gray silk gown that Eric had given her. There was an irregular heart-shaped pattern embroidered on the chest, and it was tied at the waist. The hem was very long, but it was completely supported by her tall and slender figure. It gave people a shocking feeling that below the waist were all legs. Although she was momentarily at a loss, she still straightened her back out of habit. She didn't show any signs of panic on the surface. Instead, she gave off a feeling of nobility like a goddess. This kind of aura that came from the inside out made the surrounding audience fall silent for a moment. The first reaction in most people's hearts was basically, which female star was this? It was only when someone took the lead to shout Catherine, that everyone suddenly reacted and responded excitedly. Catherine, Catherine, Catherine. The crazy flashing of the spotlights made her raise her hand to cover her eyes, but she soon realized that this action was a bit inappropriate. Halfway through, she waved her hand to the crowd with a shy smile on her face. This made the atmosphere in the venue even more frenzied. She even heard someone shouting crazy words like, "Catherine, I love you, marry me." It was a female voice. Her agent, who was standing outside the red carpet, made several gestures to her before she remembered to walk forward. She was all alone. Inexplicably, she missed that little fellow. Although he had scared her out of her wits that night, if there was such a person by her side now, and she could hold his arm, perhaps she wouldn't be so nervous and helpless in her heart. Strong men could always give people a sense of security. In the past, she had always thought that she would never need such a ridiculous thing. Now, surrounded by the crowd, she suddenly realized that maybe she still needed a little bit. Her mind was in a mess. Like a puppet, she acted according to her agent's arrangements. Walking down the red carpet and into the crowd, she finally relaxed when she met up with the crew of Saving Private Ryan. However, she was quickly pulled out by her agent and led into the auditorium, saying that she wanted to introduce the interview with ABC. Her agent had already told her about the interview. However, when the black female host praised her dress and asked which brand it was, she still couldn't answer. A certain shadow jumped out again. She heard that he had caused trouble at Worldwide's party 2 days ago. It seemed that he had tried to steal the movie rights. What a troublemaker. She also heard that he had messed around with those women again. Sigh. Although she tried to make herself look more like a big sister who was worried about her little brother, she couldn't get rid of some emotions. However, she didn't know that those emotions were called bitterness. Since he wasn't attending the Oscars, she didn't know what he was doing now. Early in the morning, after sending the 5 women out of the Sharp Corner Manor, Eric rushed to the headquarters of Firefly in Burbank. Katzenberg had always been very efficient. Although it was the weekend 2 days ago, when Eric arrived at the company, he had already taken out a general cooperation plan with Hasbro. Eric didn't know much about the surrounding operations, so he could only patiently listen to Katzenberg and the head of the brand operations department. They discussed it all morning. They didn't stop at lunch either. Eric and Katzenberg ate together and discussed the details of the preparations for a few movies. During this time, Eric briefly talked about the idea of America's Top Model. Katzenberg was excited again. He grabbed onto Eric and dug out all the ideas in his mind. He strongly suggested that America's Top Model be broadcast on Lifetime TV under the AE Television Network. The AE Television Network used to be a subsidiary network under ABC Group. At this time, it was jointly owned by Firefly Group and Hearst Group. Neither party controlled the majority of the shares. This small network mainly included several basic cable channels such as the History Channel, the Crime and Psychology Channel, and the Lifetime Women's Channel. The so-called basic cable channels, compared to HBO and Showtime, were programs that viewers could watch as long as they paid cable access fees to cable operators such as Comcast and Time Warner. Of course, different cable packages had different types of TV stations. Disney, ESPN, and several other cable TV stations under Firefly were also basic cable channels. Under normal circumstances, the cable TV package subscribers subscribed to would include at least a few dozen, or even a few hundred basic cable channels. Therefore, even the few unpopular channels under AETV station were advertised to have between 30 million and 90 million subscribers. But in fact, because they needed to share audience resources with the hundreds of basic cable channels in the package, even if the number of subscribers was the same, the viewership ratings were actually very different. The America's Top Model broadcast platform, Lifetime, which Katzenberg suggested, was such a channel. It was specifically targeted at female audiences under the age of 35. It was more targeted than MTV, WB, or UPN. But if MTV was considered a second-tier channel, Lifetime could only be considered a third-tier channel. As one could imagine, its viewership ratings were even more dismal. Eric didn't think of broadcasting America's Top Model on a small unknown TV station like Lifetime. Well, it was his own platform. Just like in his previous life, Warner Brothers didn't broadcast Friends on their own WB station, but sold it to NBC instead. America's Top Model on Lifetime couldn't fully display its value. However, Katzenberg's thinking was different from Eric's. Lifetime was indeed nothing now, but it was like a seedling. If you didn't water it or fertilize it, it would never grow. After lunch, the workaholic couldn't wait to call the AE Television Network executive in New York. A group of people held a conference call for the entire afternoon. The topic was to discuss how to further develop Lifetime. These people were all professionals in the television industry. Therefore, it only took a few hours for them to discuss a detailed development strategy and marketing plan. The main strategy was to be inspired by the success of Survivor last year. They wanted to develop Lifetime into a TV station that mainly broadcast reality shows targeted at females. Previously, Lifetime mainly broadcast low-budget chick movies and female TV dramas. Also, it wasn't very large-scale. Its programs mainly relied on buying the rights to broadcast popular shows from large TV stations. There were very few self-produced programs. The scale of its programs was even ranked behind the AE Television Network's History Channel and Criminal Minds Channel. However, it was also true that a small boat was easy to turn around. Since they had decided on a further development strategy, of course they had to do it. First, they had to leave America's Top Model behind. This was cheating the boss. Although Eric complained a little in his heart, he didn't lack the spirit of adventure. Since everyone's morale was high because of Katzenberg's instigation in just one afternoon, he didn't mind taking a gamble. Therefore, he agreed just like that. After all, the production cost of America's Top Model was indeed very low. The format of the show wasn't complicated. Even if it didn't make money, the possibility of it losing money wasn't high. Later, most of the reality shows in North America had a unified ancestor: Survivor. In Eric's fragmented memories, America's Top Model was basically a model version of Survivor. The elimination mechanism, the contestants' open and closed arguments, and even the crying scenes in every episode were all left over from Survivor. But it couldn't be helped. The American audience loved to watch this. Otherwise, Survivor wouldn't have achieved such heaven-defying ratings. Then, Katzenberg's next move made Eric feel that this guy's annual salary of tens of millions was really not in vain. Not only did he immediately ask the head of AE Television Network to come to Los Angeles tomorrow to discuss the matter in more detail, but he also pulled over the management of the TV program production department under Firefly to discuss the general production details of America's Top Model, with Eric on the spot. When all the work was almost done, it was already 8 o'clock in the evening. 8 o'clock, 8 o'clock. It seemed like a few days ago, he was still complaining that some of the resentment wouldn't fall on him anyway. But retribution really came quickly. In just a few days, he had become a resentment machine. But as a boss, Eric obviously couldn't tell his employees, "Hey, don't work so hard. Let's get off work early." So he could only accompany them until the evening lights came on. The Oscar Awards ceremony was almost halfway done. Eric, Katzenberg and the others came out of the conference room and went straight to the restaurant in the headquarters building. Although they still had to attend the party after the Oscar Awards ceremony, Eric's stomach was rumbling with hunger. Once the high-intensity work was over, most people's first reaction was usually one word: hungry. After ordering dinner, the group knew what day it was and immediately turned on the TV in the restaurant. The sound came from the TV. It happened to be the award ceremony for the Best Original Screenplay. Both Saving Private Ryan and Braveheart were nominated for the Best Original Screenplay, but Eric had already won this award once. He also knew that at his age, it was impossible for them to give him another Oscar so soon. So after getting a nomination, he completely gave up on public relations for this award and had no intention of attending the ceremony. After listening to the guest talk for a while, they began to introduce the nominees for the Best Original Screenplay. Eric was a little absent-minded at first, but he quickly pulled himself together, because he heard a familiar name. Of course, it wasn't Braveheart, nor Saving Private Ryan, nor was it Bullets Fly Across Broadway by the small man with the big glasses. Well, it wasn't For Weddings and a Funeral either. Although Eric had a deep impression of the female lead in this film, he didn't pay attention to the screenwriter of this film. What made him excited was a film called Sin Angel. This film had two screenwriters. One was called Fran Wills. There was no need to pay attention to him. The other was like thunder to his ears. His name was Peter Jackson. Peter Jackson. Moreover, the two female leads in this film also made Eric very interested. Faye Wynn withstood the powerful butterfly effect and stubbornly broke into Hollywood again. The other female lead was also an actress who had left a deep impression on Eric in his previous life. Melanie Lynskey, the eccentric stalker next door in 2.5 Men, Ross. Chapter 7:10. Peter Jackson had already had the idea of filming the Lord of the Rings series when he was a child, but it took him a long time to realize his dream when he was almost 40 years old. Through the TV in the Firefly headquarters restaurant, Eric saw Peter Jackson, who was not yet a fat man, wearing a black suit that looked very ill-fitting. His hair was unkempt, and his expression was nervous. The Best Original Screenplay award was won by Braveheart without much suspense. Peter Jackson's image was immediately cut out, leaving only a disappointed silhouette. In fact, even if Braveheart did not win the Best Original Screenplay award, it would not have been Sin Angel's turn. The scripts of the following films, Saving Private Ryan, For Weddings and a Funeral, and Bullets Across Broadway, were much better than Sin Angel's. This film's script was just coincidentally based on the theme of a biopic. The reason why it could be nominated for Best Original Screenplay, in Eric's opinion, was very simple. It was because the distributor was called Miramax. Since the other party had successfully entered the industry, Eric believed that what would come, so he did not take the initiative to contact Peter Jackson. After Best Original Screenplay, there were a few technical awards that did not matter. Finally, it was the end of the award ceremony. Next, there were only 4 awards left: Best Actress, Best Actor, Best Director, and Best Film. Everyone in the restaurant was excited. Nominees for Best Actress include Jodie Foster in Annie in the Heart, Winona Ryder in Little Women, Susan Sarandon in The Ultimate Witness, Miranda Charlson in Tom and Viv, and Jessica Lange in Loose in the Heart. Jodie Foster and Winona Ryder definitely had no hope. Miranda Charlson was also a small fry, because the distributor of Tom and Viv was still Miramax. The Wayne-Stam brothers would definitely not change their strategy of getting nominations in a short time. The remaining nominees, Jessica Lange and Susan Sarandon, were both heavyweight actresses in Hollywood. They had already been nominated for at least 3 Best Actress awards. It could be said that they were neck and neck. Eric remembered that Susan Sarandon's Best Actress award was next year's Death Row's Walk. Then this year's Best Actress award would definitely be Jessica Lange. Indeed, after a series of introductions, the previous Best Actor, Daniel Day-Lewis, politely read out Jessica Lange's name. The entire audience applauded. After the Best Female Lead award was given out, it was Denzel Washington who went on stage to introduce the Best Picture nominee, Saving Private Ryan. A few minutes later, last year's Best Female Lead award winner, Holly Hunter, walked on stage in a red gown and began to present the Best Male Lead award. This year's Best Actor award was the most predictable. It could even be seen from the audience's reaction. When Holly Hunter introduced the nominees and read out Tom Hanks's name, the audience's applause was obviously much louder. At the same time, Mel Gibson's slightly bitter and stiff smile appeared on the TV screen. His Best Actor award was completely forced by the Wayne-Stam brothers. Their purpose was to ruin his Best Director nomination. Watching Tom Hanks walk onto the stage after hugging the cast of Saving Private Ryan, amidst the cheers of the audience, Carson, who was sitting opposite Eric, said, "Eric, are you confident this time?" Eric knew that Katzenberg was asking about Catherine's nomination for Best Director. He nodded slightly and said with a smile, "If she still can't get Best Director, then the Oscar committee is really fair." In order to promote Catherine's Best Director nomination, Eric used all the connections he had accumulated over the years. Steven Spielberg, Francis Coppola, and other big names personally helped Eric pull some votes in private. As for the many directors who had worked with Firefly, it was needless to say. In addition, there was no doubt that Saving Private Ryan was an award winner, and the Wayne-Stam brothers had agreed to take the initiative to withdraw from the competition. Catherine's chances of winning the award were more than 90%. Of course, Eric also knew that in a short period of time, it was best to use his influence to pull votes only once. If he used it too often, there would definitely be a backlash from the Academy. Eric was very confident, and had already begun to order people to prepare a car to rush to the hotel where the celebration banquet would be held. However, in the Sacred Citizen Auditorium, Catherine, who was sitting among the cast of Saving Private Ryan, was extremely nervous. Her fingers tightly gripped the armrest of the chair as she stared at last year's Best Director winner, Robert Altman. Although Eric had brought her to several public relations cocktail parties, there were more things that he did not tell her. Catherine did not know that she was actually infinitely close to winning this award. Then the nominees for the 67th Academy Award for Best Director are Robert Redford, Lies Behind the Curtain; Woody Allen, Bullets Across Broadway; Mel Gibson, Braveheart; Krzysztof Kieslowski, Red; and Catherine Bigelow, Saving Private Ryan. Robert Altman slowly introduced this year's 5 nominees for Best Director. He leisurely opened the envelope in his hand and glanced at it. The corners of his mouth curled up into a smile. He raised his voice and said, "Well, the historic moment has arrived." Robert Altman, who was already 70 years old, spoke as slowly and steadily as the long shots in his films. When he finished speaking, there was an obvious pause. Countless pairs of eyes in the hall had already turned to Catherine. The woman suppressed the urge to raise her hand to cover her mouth and waited patiently with trembling hands. After whetting the crowd's appetite a little, Robert Altman said. Then the Oscar will belong to Kathryn Bigelow, Saving Private Ryan. Let us congratulate this beautiful lady together. She will be the first female Best Director winner in the history of the Academy Awards. Clap, clap, clap. Warm applause sounded. Noticing the tall figure in a light gray suit sitting in the middle of the fifth row covering her mouth and standing up shakily, the applause in the hall became even louder. Then some people took the initiative to stand up and cheered. At the age of 67, Oscar finally ushered in its first Best Director award. This was indeed a historic moment. The applause did not stop until Kathryn hugged everyone in the crew and walked up to the stage. It lasted for nearly 2 minutes, until Kathryn finally recovered from her excitement. She sat down and took several deep breaths. Only when she stood in front of Mike did the applause gradually die down. Thank you, thank you, thank you everyone. Kathryn thanked them incoherently. When everyone in the hall sat down, her eyes involuntarily swept around the hall. There were countless familiar and unfamiliar faces, but one was missing. When she saw the mechanical arm in the hall slowly turn toward her, she remembered that even if he was not here, he should at least be in front of the television. Therefore, her eyes involuntarily turned to the black lens. Sitting at the dining table in the Firefly headquarters restaurant, Eric was also looking at the wall-mounted television. At this moment, he could clearly feel the curiosity in Kathryn's eyes. This emotion seemed to be too obvious. Even Katzenberg, who was sitting opposite him, grinned at him and smiled a little obscenely. On the screen, Kathryn's expression quickly calmed down, and she began to give her acceptance speech. Although her slightly shaky tone was perfectly covered by her excitement, Eric could still hear the traces of reciting. He smiled. It was indeed difficult for a woman like her, who did not even know how to stand on the stage, to do this kind of thing. There was nothing much to see in the following awards ceremony. Braveheart won the Best Film Award without any suspense. Mel Gibson was able to go on stage as the producer this time, but he was sandwiched between the other two winners. The emotions of the guests at the scene seemed to have been completely exhausted by the Best Director award just now, and their reactions were not so enthusiastic. When everything was over, the guests in the Sacred Citizen Auditorium got up and walked out one after another in the final shot. Eric, Katzenberg, and the other senior executives of Firefly also got up at the same time. Saving Private Ryan had won 5 awards, including Best Director, Best Actor, Best Cinematography, Best Sound Effects, and Best Editing. At the celebration party, the senior executives of Firefly definitely had to make an appearance. In another corner of Los Angeles, thousands of guests slowly walked out of the auditorium and gradually got into the waiting cars outside. They dispersed one after another. The older people might directly rush back to the hotel or home, but most people would rush to the next stop tonight, the various parties. Due to the 3-hour time difference between the East and West, in order to accommodate the audience on the East Coast, the Academy Awards ceremony had always been held on the West Coast at 6 p.m. and ended at 9 p.m. Although it was already early in the morning on the East Coast, the nightlife on the West Coast still started. Firefly's celebration party was arranged at the Sunset Tower Hotel. Eric, Katzenberg, and the others were the first to arrive. There were not many people in the party hall. However, in less than 5 minutes, the Sunset Tower Hotel was bustling with noise and excitement. Countless high-end cars stopped outside the Sunset Tower Hotel. Only then did Eric find out that Fox's celebration party was also arranged here. Because she had to be interviewed after the Oscars, Kathryn had to come later. However, the other members of the Saving Private Ryan crew arrived first. On Fox's side, Elizabeth, Wayne, and Stan had also rushed over early. The banquet halls of the two families were on different floors. Eric knew that Fox's side was much livelier, so Elizabeth did not come over to greet him. There were more and more people in the party hall. The 5 members of Victoria's Secret's Angels who were going on stage to award the Best Visual Effects award arrived one after another. There were also members of other film crews who had received a few Oscar nominations. Eric also saw most of the people from the Lion, the Assassin crew. They were still thin and small: Natalie Portman, Luc Besson, who had not yet put on weight, and Jean Reno, who looked like an uncle. Lion. The Assassin was released last year and did not do very well at the box office in the United States. The critics also complained about Luc Besson's excessive portrayal of Natalie Portman as Lolita. However, the film was quite popular in Europe and Asia. Eric knew that in the coming years, with the rise of the internet, the film would become more and more popular. Although Lyon, the Assassin was not liked by film critics and did not receive any Oscar nominations, Natalie Portman, the young lady, had truly taken her first step in Hollywood. After the release of Lyon, the Assassin, she even received a small role in Time Warner's star-studded Thief of Fire, playing the role of Al Pacino's daughter. However, whether she would be able to receive the role of Queen Amidala in the Star Wars prequel series like in his previous life, was not something that Eric cared about. After about 10 minutes, Catherine finally appeared at the door. "Congratulations, Catherine." Eric looked at the little golden figure in the woman's hand and went forward to give her a hug. Catherine's emotions had not calmed down. When she saw Eric, she became excited again. She hugged him and said, "Thank you, Eric." "You're welcome." Eric nodded with a smile. There were too many people around them, and the two of them did not have time to talk too much. Catherine was surrounded by others. Eric looked at the lively crowd and turned to Katzenberg, who came over. "Are Roger Ailes and the rest not planning to come?" Roger Ailes was the director of The Lion King. Although The Lion King did not receive a nomination for Best Film like the Golden Globe Awards, it still won 3 Best Original Songs and 1 Best Score. It could be considered a small limelight. At this time, the hand-drawn animation department had already belonged to Paramount, but most of the copyright of The Lion King still belonged to Firefly. Firefly would not be so stingy as to not send an invitation to the celebration party. Katzenberg shook his head. "They won't come. Paramount's celebration party is at the Four Seasons Hotel. They will definitely go there." Eric smiled and asked about the situation of Disney's Monster Power Company. The two chatted for a while, and Eric saw the little girl come out of the crowd and run straight into his arms. The little girl would definitely not be absent from such an occasion. Eric smiled and let the little girl rub against his arms before pulling her away. He nodded to the twins behind him and asked, "How are the preparations for your films going?" "It's so boring. Why are we talking about work now?" The little girl immediately rolled her eyes and said. Chapter 7:11. Harvey Weinstein respectfully said goodbye and hung up the phone. He took a deep breath, turned around, and walked toward the banquet hall. His expression was full of pride. The phone call was from News Corporation's chairman, Rupert Murdoch, who was far away in New York. Although it was just a simple congratulatory message, it was already past midnight in New York. From this point, it could be seen that News Corporation valued Mira Mike very much. Tonight's Oscar ceremony was definitely the most glorious moment in the 16 years of Mira Mike's existence. After being acquired last year, relying on the strong financial support of the parent company, Mira Mike finally got rid of the financial constraints of the past. Moreover, with the production and distribution of Braveheart, Bullets Across Broadway, Red, Sin Angel, and other films, Mira Mike received an unprecedented total of 27 Oscar nominations. They won all the major Oscar awards and successfully won 9 Oscars. Behind these honors was Mira Mike's annual net profit of more than $200 million in 1994. This performance was even close to the profit scale of 20th Century Fox's headquarters. In the midst of pride and excitement, Harvey Weinstein was inevitably a little disappointed. If he didn't sell the company last year, or kept more shares, then he could get more dividends from Mira Mike's annual profits. But he soon got rid of this idea. There were many things in this world that did not have ifs. A few years ago, Eric, who had just made a name for himself, had even sent an acquisition invitation to Miramax. If he had agreed to that deal, even if he only had 10% or less of Firefly's shares now, it would still be a huge fortune. Harvey Weinstein shook his head and sighed. As soon as he returned to the party hall, a figure in a black suit with disheveled hair approached him. "Hey, Harvey." The man had obviously been waiting for him for a while. He knew that Weinstein was very busy, so he didn't beat around the bush and said in a hurried tone, I heard that Firefly's celebration party is upstairs. Do you remember the thing I talked to you about? Harvey Weinstein paid attention to building a good relationship with excellent filmmakers. Although the New Zealand director in front of him didn't get anything tonight, Harvey Weinstein didn't show the slightest perfunctory attitude. He stopped and thought for a moment, then said, "Peter, you mean Lord of the Rings?" Peter Jackson quickly nodded and said, "Yes, Harvey, isn't the film rights of the Lord of the Rings series in the hands of Flowers Pictures? I was wondering if you could introduce me?" Out of a subtle ostrich mentality, Harvey Weinstein didn't want to see another guy who was more dazzling in Hollywood. He hesitated for a moment and said, "Peter, look here. There are so many guests to entertain. I can't leave now." Peter Jackson was not discouraged and said, "Harvey, it's okay if you don't have time. Can you get someone to take us into the party? I just went up, but I was blocked outside." "Oh, haha." Harvey Weinstein froze for a moment, then laughed and patted Peter Jackson on the shoulder. "Of course, no problem, Peter." With Weinstein's help, Peter Jackson was not blocked outside this time, and easily entered Firefly's party hall. Although Firefly only had one heavyweight Oscar film, the guests at the party were obviously more than foxes. There were 200 people bustling about. Weinstein's assistant, Brad Gray, sent Peter Jackson to the party hall and left. He had no intention of introducing him further. Peter Jackson didn't expect that either. He wandered in the crowd for a while with a glass of champagne in his hand before he noticed Eric Williams. However, Eric Williams was surrounded by 7 or 8 people, men and women, who seemed to be discussing something enthusiastically. Peter Jackson knew that it was not a good time to get in touch with the other party, so he had to wait patiently for Eric to be free. Eric was surrounded by Katzenberg, his former assistant Alan Fissman, who he had sent to the TV production department, the little girl who was hanging on him, and the Victoria's Secret 5. They didn't talk about anything too formal. On the surface, they were just chatting casually. However, the Victoria's Secret 5 seemed to have realized something and very cleverly led the topic to the reality TV show. From time to time, they even probed Eric with a few words. Inadvertently, a figure with disheveled hair and a very uncoordinated black suit fell into Eric's eyes. Watching the other party wander around for more than 10 minutes, Eric curled the corner of his mouth and reached out to push the little girl. "Drew, can you help me get a glass of champagne?" The little girl blinked her big bright eyes. How could she not understand that Eric wanted to send her away? Although she didn't like the 5 long-legged beauties in front of her, she took the initiative to let go of Eric's arm and walked towards the long table where the drinks were placed not far away. Peter Jackson waited patiently for more than 10 minutes and found that the people around Eric had no intention of leaving. Just as he was considering whether to continue waiting or forcefully approach to strike up a conversation, he saw Drew Barrymore walk out from the group. He immediately realized that this was a good opportunity. Although the copyright of the Lord of the Rings series was in the hands of Flower Pictures, Peter Jackson knew very well that the real decision-maker behind Flower Pictures was Eric Williams. In the eyes of outsiders, Drew Barrymore was just a spokesperson. But at this time, there was no chance to talk to Eric Williams. The success rate of forcefully approaching him was even slimmer. It was worth a try to get in touch with Drew Barrymore. Although she wasn't sure why Eric wanted to send her away, the little girl didn't dwell on it. She noticed a tall figure in a light gray suit who was also surrounded by people not far away. She rolled her eyes and was about to go up and talk to this shy person when she heard someone call her name. "Miss Barrymore." She turned around and saw a white man with unkempt hair and a stubble. The little girl was curious whether the poor suit was borrowed or stolen. Her doll-like face revealed a sweet smile. "Sir, you called for me?" "Yes." Peter Jackson nodded quickly and reached out to the little girl. "Hello, Miss Barrymore. My name is Peter Jackson. I'm a director." "Oh." The little girl reached out and shook hands with him. She nodded and waited for him to continue. Peter Jackson thought of many ways to start the conversation, but when it came to it, his thoughts were scattered again. He hesitated for a long time before saying, "It's like this, Miss Barrymore. I've been a fan of Tolkien's books since I was a child. I even embarked on the path of a director in the hope that one day, I can personally bring The Lord of the Rings to the big screen. I heard that Flowers Pictures holds the copyright of the Lord of the Rings series, so I hope to get the opportunity to direct." The little girl asked, "Have you directed a similar film?" Peter Jackson shook his head and said, "Not yet, but I've been doing the relevant preparation work over the years. About the adaptation of the script, the shooting of the film, the styling of the characters, and so on. As long as you give me a chance to show off, I believe I can definitely convince you." The little girl blinked and said, "Then tell me about your ideas for the film first. I'm listening." Peter Jackson glanced at Eric from the corner of his eyes. He was a little hesitant, not knowing if it would be useful to tell this blonde beauty in front of him. The little girl also noticed the change in his eyes. She smiled slyly and said, "You said that you've been preparing for this film for many years, but you don't even have the patience to tell me about your ideas?" Peter Jackson realized his mistake. If he couldn't seize the opportunity in front of him, what else could he talk about? So he quickly pulled himself together and said, "It's like this, Miss Barrymore. First of all, I think that The Lord of the Rings shouldn't be made into just one film. It'd be best if it could be made into a trilogy. Otherwise, it'd be a waste of this epic work, and it wouldn't be able to fully show the grand world that Tolkien had constructed." The little girl nodded and agreed with him. She said Eric said so too. Please continue. When Peter Jackson heard the little girl's words, he perked up and said, "In the script I've conceived, the story can start from the 111-year-old birthday of the hobbit Bilbo Baggins. The One Ring that Sauron created thousands of years ago, after a series of twists and turns, fell into the hands of Bilbo Baggins. Bilbo Baggins showed off the magic of the One Ring at his birthday party, and was discovered by Gandalf, who came to visit. Under Gandalf's advice, Bilbo Baggins left the One Ring to his nephew, Frodo Baggins. At the same time, after thousands of years of slumber, Sauron woke up and made a comeback. He sent 9 ringwraiths to search for the One Ring. Peter Jackson realized that the little girl was very interested in this story, so he relied on his familiarity with the original book of The Lord of the Rings to tell the story with a lot of twists and turns. He also answered the questions that the little girl occasionally asked. After briefly describing the concept of the trilogy's script, he began to talk about his ideas for filming. Unknowingly, more than half an hour had passed. Although the little girl had bought the movie rights to all of Tolkien's works according to Eric's request, she did not have the patience to read them all. At this time, she was listening with great interest. When Peter Jackson finished, the little girl turned her head and looked not far away. The 5 long-legged sprites beside Eric had disappeared. She said to Peter Jackson, "Come with me. I'll take you to see the person you want to see." Peter Jackson was a little embarrassed when he heard this. It turned out that his thoughts had been completely guessed by the little girl. However, he did not hesitate and followed her closely. "Eric, this is Peter Jackson. He wants to film The Lord of the Rings. He just told me some ideas. It's not bad." The little girl gave a concise introduction. Eric smiled and shook hands with Peter Jackson. "Hello, Mr. Jackson." "Hello, Mr. Williams. I saw that you were talking for a long time. Were you discussing this matter?" Peter Jackson nodded. "Yes, Mr. Williams. Miss Barrymore is a very patient listener." Eric turned his head and looked at the little girl beside him. "What do you think? He's prepared very carefully. I think he can give it a try." Since the other party had come knocking on his door, Eric did not want to waste his energy pretending to be polite. He was not idle at all now. He said to Peter Jackson, "In that case, you can go to the headquarters of Flowers Pictures tomorrow and talk to Miss Amy Pascal again. However, there is one more thing. Even if we reach an agreement, this project cannot be launched for the next few years. You'd better be mentally prepared in advance." When Peter Jackson heard Eric's words, he was anxious again. He was happy that he finally saw some hope, but he did not understand how long Eric meant by a few years. Fortunately, the little girl asked for him. "Eric, when can it be launched? I don't lack money here. About 1 or 2 years." Eric smiled and said, "When you have the strength to distribute this film alone, it will probably be time." When Eric said this, the little girl roughly understood. Eric meant that it should be after Flowers Pictures took over MGM. With the current situation, it did not seem to take long. MGM had been tossing and turning for so many years that the production department had reached a point where it could be ignored. Only the distribution department was still intact. What Flowers Pictures needed was MGM's film distribution network. After exchanging contact information and sending Peter Jackson away, Eric turned his attention to Katzenberg and Allen next to him, and asked another question. Who do you think is more suitable? Eric was referring to the candidate for the host of America's Top Model. He had just chatted with the 5 Victoria's Secret angels just now. In fact, he also had the intention to test them. Allen looked at Katzenberg. Katzenberg was not polite and said, Eric, Miss Krug is definitely not suitable. With her current age and delicate temperament, she can't support such a show. When Eric heard Katzenberg's eagerness to reject Diane Krug, he shrugged. Jeffrey, do you think I am the kind of person who is headstrong and self-opinionated? Katzenberg grinned and thought to himself, who knows what you are thinking? He still felt that Eric was too hasty in using the Wachowski brothers to film The Matrix. If Eric let Diane Krug be the host of America's Top Model, this time, Katzenberg would not be too surprised. He would only feel that it was too reckless. In addition, Miss Dewington's high street fashion style is too heavy. She doesn't seem to be very eloquent either. She is also not suitable for this kind of reality show that requires intimate interaction. The rest are Cindy Crawford, Linda Evangelista, and Tara Banks. Well, Tara Banks is a little young and inexperienced, and her skin color isn't pleasant, but her exuberant energy is a big advantage over the other two. Chapter 7:12. In the end, the discussion focused on Linda Evangelista, Cindy Crawford, and Tara Banks. The title of supermodel originated from Linda Evangelista. It was undoubtedly the most persuasive to let her be the host of this program. Cindy Crawford had frequently appeared on TV before the Victoria's Secret show. Although the popularity of the 5 spokespersons was almost the same in the eyes of the public after the Victoria's Secret show, Cindy Crawford had the qualifications to host a TV show. Tara Banks had a very energetic personality. Obviously, it was easier for her to get along with the contestants on the show. She was very approachable. However, her weakness was also very obvious. Tara Banks was born in 1973 and was only 22 years old. Although she had gained a lot of popularity through the Victoria's Secret show, it was difficult for her age to convince the public. Otherwise, Eric wouldn't have considered her as the host of America's Top Model in the original spacetime. After some discussion, the decision fell to Eric. To be honest, although he had experienced the absurdity of the past 2 days, Eric didn't know much about the 5 women. Most of his memories from his previous life came from various media. Now that he was in this circle, Eric would be too stupid to believe the media's information. The plans for the reform of Lifetime TV and America's Top Model had just begun. Eric wasn't in a hurry. He planned to talk to them in detail before making a decision. Time passed unknowingly. It was late at night. Eric was listening to Luc Besson talk about the concept of a sci-fi film when he heard Catherine's voice. Eric, it's too late. I think I should go back. When Luc Besson saw Catherine approaching, he tactfully raised his glass and took the initiative to walk away with a smile. Catherine looked a little embarrassed. Am I interrupting your conversation? Of course not. Eric shook his head. He looked at his watch. It was just past 11 o'clock. Not many people had left the party. However, for Catherine, who had a very regular lifestyle, it was obviously too late. Eric put down his wrist and looked up at Catherine, who was holding the golden figure tightly in front of her. There was a hint of nervousness and panic in the woman's expression. Eric smiled and said, "Shall I send you back?" No need. Catherine shook her head subconsciously, and the trace of nervousness and panic on her beautiful face immediately overflowed. You've been drinking. It's not safe for you to drive. I'm worried, Eric said as he gestured toward the door. Catherine moved her feet and suddenly said, You drank too. Eric said, I have a driver. Let's go. Catherine followed behind Eric and walked towards the door. However, she still whispered, I can take a taxi back. Do you think you're the heroine of a movie who can flag down a taxi with a wave of your hand? It's already late at night. How can there be a taxi? Eric joked. He waved his hand and made a few gestures to Katzenberg, who was not far away, indicating for him to arrange the next thing. The two came to the parking lot. Eric personally opened the car door and let Catherine in. He sat next to her, asked for Catherine's address, and instructed the driver to drive. The streets near Sunset Boulevard were still brightly lit, but there were fewer cars and people. The car drove through Sunset Boulevard. Inside the car, Eric looked at Catherine holding the golden figure in her hands. For some reason, he had the illusion that he was sitting next to an inexperienced little girl. He smiled and took the initiative to liven up the atmosphere. How's your discussion with Terrence Malick about the script for Red Alert? It's okay. There are some differences in the details, but it's not a big problem. Next month, we plan to go to Guadalcanal Island for a field trip. Terrence wants to do a field trip. Eric nodded. Oh, have you thought about when to start shooting? Although Red Alert was to be invested in by Firefly, it was not a commercial film. Therefore, Eric was very lenient with the production plan of the film and allowed Catherine and Terrence Malick to decide on their own. Next year. I want to prepare more time, Catherine hesitated and said. The two chatted casually. Before they knew it, the car stopped outside a house in Coldwater Canyon. Eric had always been full of complaints about all the infrastructure in Los Angeles except for the highway network. The two got out of the car. They were surrounded by old street lights. In the dim yellow light, they could see a pole covered with dark moss. It looked like it was about to fall. Good night then, said Eric, spreading his arms to Catherine. Good night. Catherine carefully came over and hugged him. She let go and said, good night. After that, the woman walked to the door behind her. Eric thought of something and shouted, Catherine. The woman froze and turned around. What? Eric pointed to the golden statuette in her hand. In the next few days, I may need you to cooperate with a few interviews. I hope you can prepare. Oh, I know. After the woman said that, she looked at him for less than 2 seconds. Realizing that the man had no intention of continuing, she fled into the yard again. Eric smiled and sat back in the car. In the front seat, Carter Moan started the car but didn't forget to tease him. Boss, this isn't your style. Just drive. I already feel like I'm guilty. I feel like I'm bullying a little girl. Carter Moan skillfully turned the car around and said, Ms. Bigelow must have feelings for you. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been so flustered. It's still a little short, Eric replied vaguely. The next day, the news of the first female Best Director in the history of the Oscars quickly occupied the headlines of major media outlets around the world, causing a frenzy. At the same time, Firefly also took the opportunity to launch a new round of publicity for the videotape of Saving Private Ryan. Thanks to Catherine winning the Academy Award for Best Director, in the following week, the videotape sales of Saving Private Ryan in North America easily exceeded 1 million units. In Europe, because the videotape was released behind North America, it was at a time when the market was hungry. With the cooperation of Firefly's publicity, the European distributors easily beat North America's weekly sales figures, close to 1.5 million units. In just a week, the videotape sales of Saving Private Ryan brought in $75 million for Firefly. Firefly internally predicted that the final videotape sales of the film would exceed $500 million, even surpassing the global box office of the film in terms of statistics. Because film companies usually did not release videotape sales figures to the public, most of the outside world was still stuck in the reverie of Catherine winning the Academy Award for Best Director. However, Hollywood was in an uproar because of the video sales figures of Saving Private Ryan. Several major film companies began to look for outstanding war movie scripts. The most direct result was that Catherine's next film, Red Alert, attracted a lot of attention from both inside and outside Hollywood. It even caused a medium-sized lawsuit. It turned out that before Terrence Malick contacted Eric, in order to produce this film, he had contacted many production companies, including the other 6 major film companies. That was not a big deal. The key was that in the process of contacting an independent film company called Phoenix, Terrence Malick signed a contract of intent with the other company, authorizing them to raise production funds for Red Alert. However, that was already 1988. The film's budget was too high, and the risks were too great. Of course, Phoenix did not manage to pull in a single cent of investment in the end. According to industry practice, under such circumstances, the contract of intent was almost automatically void. This matter should have been over just like that. The project was taken over by Firefly, and everything seemed to be in order. However, after Catherine won the Academy Award for Best Director, and after Saving Private Ryan achieved amazing results in the videotape market, Robert Gessler, the producer of Phoenix Film Company, jumped out and claimed that Phoenix had already raised enough funds for Red Alert according to the original contract. He asked Firefly to return the production and distribution rights of the film. Hollywood was full of bullsh*t, and Eric did not take it to heart. He just handed it over to Firefly's legal department. He had read the script of Red Alert, and had a lot of information about the film in his memory. He knew that it was not a film that was a big box office hit. Moreover, he also knew that Phoenix might just want to participate in the investment. As long as it did not affect the production of the film, Eric did not mind giving up a little of the investment rights. Of course, if the other party did not know how to appreciate the kindness, Eric did not mind letting them have a taste of Firefly's anger. After the Oscars, Eric's main focus was on the reform of Lifetime TV station and the preparation for America's Top Model. Lifetime TV station was established in the early 1980s. It was formed by the merger of two small TV stations owned by ABC Television Station and the Hearst Group. Together, they were under the AE Television Network. In the first few years of its establishment, Lifetime TV station was in a state of loss. It was not until the late 1980s that it barely broke even. According to theoretical data, Lifetime TV station had 30 million subscribers, which were all the theoretical subscribers included in the different cable packages of the operators. However, in reality, just like the legal channels, educational channels, and foreign language channels that were also cable TV channels in China that few people watched, Lifetime TV station was the kind of unpopular TV channel that had been ignored by users for a long time. Even the more popular programs on the channel usually did not exceed 2 million viewers. Because the ratings were very mediocre, several major cable operators often said that they would not carry this TV channel. After all, just like the internet, cable TV signal transmission also consumed bandwidth. Before Katzenberg mentioned this TV station, Eric had almost forgotten that Firefly had such a TV channel. After the plan was launched, Eric also learned more about Lifetime TV station. In the 1980s, Lifetime TV station mainly broadcast the programs produced by ABC Television Network. Occasionally, they would buy some very cheap low-budget female films. The content of the programs could only be described as monotonous. It was not until the early 1990s, when ABC Television Network's performance recovered. With the support of the parent company, Lifetime TV station began to try to produce movies or miniseries on its own. However, the number of programs produced over the years was still less than 2. Compared to ABC Television Station, which had to broadcast dozens of new TV shows every year, the scale was still negligible. Therefore, it was not an easy task to reform such an unknown TV station. Fortunately, with the successful experience of ESPN growing from less than 300,000 subscribers to the #1 sports TV station in the United States, the executives of Firefly were very confident. They quickly came up with a very detailed development plan. On the other hand, although the American cable TV industry was established in the 1980s, it really started to flourish in the second half of the 1990s. The rise of the high-tech industry not only led to the development of the Internet, but also allowed American operators to expand their cable TV networks on a large scale. If one paid attention to American TV series, they would realize that many classic American TV series produced by cable TV stations started in the second half of the 1990s. The most famous of these were undoubtedly the few movies produced by Time Warner's HBO. At this time, the American cable TV industry, in Eric's opinion, could only be described as flourishing. The wave of new technology had just arisen. Although the main focus was still on the internet, a large amount of money was invested in the TV industry at the same time. Firefly had a very complete internal capital chain. It did not need to be like other film companies, who needed external investment banks or foreign film and television funds to obtain financing from time to time. However, the large amount of money invested in the TV industry indirectly built a bigger platform for Firefly. At the same time, the American cable TV industry's regulations were becoming more and more lax. Large-scale integration had actually started last year. Back then, Barry Diller and Sam Lay Sherdong had fought for Viacom together. The reason why they had suffered a crushing defeat was that Barry Diller's parent company, Long Distance Communications, had merged with AT&T. Long Distance Communications was a large cable television company. Therefore, with the overall rise of the industry, it was the best time to set up the cable TV industry. After all, according to the memories of his previous life, even if the public TV network did not completely decline, it would gradually be suppressed by the cable TV stations with better quality content. Moreover, many cable TV stations had not realized the upcoming opportunity. If Lifetime TV station could make arrangements in advance, it would not be impossible to replace some of the cable TV stations that might have been rising. Chapter 713. To revitalize a TV station, it was definitely not enough to rely on a popular program. However, a popular program that was full of topics and attracted widespread media attention could significantly increase the popularity of the relevant TV channel and gather more popularity for it. As long as the situation opened up and they continued to produce high-quality TV programs, the TV station could enter a virtuous cycle of continuous development. This was Eric's expectation for America's Top Model. Firefly did not have a large expansion plan in the next few years, but it did not mean that Firefly would stop growing. Before Eric proposed the idea of America's Top Model, Katzenberg had already begun to increase investment in Firefly's record business. Eric was familiar with the development prospects of the Western record industry. Although he was not enthusiastic about Katzenberg's development plan, he did not stop him. With strict copyright protection laws, although the Western record market was becoming more and more depressed due to the strong impact of the Internet era, it did not decline to the point where the entire industry disappeared. In addition to the record business, a more standardized commercial operation of products related to popular movies was one of Firefly's important development plans in the next few years. The upcoming cooperation negotiations with Hasbro Group for toys was part of this plan. After hearing the idea of America's Top Model, the energetic Katzenberg immediately proposed the idea of revitalizing Lifetime TV. As mentioned earlier, even if America's Top Model was successful again, a popular show would definitely not be able to support a TV station. After many brainstorming meetings, the management quickly developed a set of detailed original program production, reuse of the network's resources, program arrangement, and channel marketing plan. Firefly would invest $100 million a year in the production, procurement, and marketing of Lifetime TV for the next 3 years. It was expected to create a professional female TV station for young women who focused on fashion and high-quality life. Lifetime TV's parent company, AE Network, was jointly owned by Firefly Group and Hearst Group. Therefore, this reform plan for Lifetime still needed to be negotiated with Hearst Group and obtain the relevant supportive resources. Hearst Group owned hundreds of daily newspapers, weeklies, and magazines around the world. At present, these print media resources were still indispensable for the promotion of the female channel. After the Oscars, the awards season was finally over. Eric also dealt with most of the film projects that he needed to personally pay attention to. But before he could rest for a few days, a bunch of things came rushing at him again. The Hearst Corporation was headquartered in New York, and so was AETV. Once the plan came to fruition, most of Lifetime TV's programs would also be produced in New York. No matter how one looked at it, Eric had to personally head to New York to discuss and make arrangements. At the same time, the two little guys' birthdays were coming soon, and this year's Easter was on April 16th. On these special days, He had to make time to accompany his women and children. Hasbro's headquarters was in Rhode Island, which was very close to New York. The negotiations between the two parties regarding the development of toys were finally decided to be held in New York. Firefly Investment and Sprint's investment negotiations had already begun. It involved more than $1 billion of investment, and Eric had to attend some important events in person. Firefly Investments and Sprint were both headquartered in New York. On the plane to New York, Eric did a simple calculation of the schedule and found that after finishing these things, the summer vacation of the movie would be over. As soon as he got off the plane, Eric threw himself into work. In the conference room of ABC TV's headquarters on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, the executives of Firefly TV, AETV, and representatives from the Hearst Corporation were holding a related meeting. At Eric's invitation, the third-generation head of the Hearst Corporation, William Hearst, was also sitting in the conference room. According to the 1994 statistics, Lifetime TV has 31.5 million subscribers. Comcast, Time Warner, Telcom, and other cable operators pay an average of 15 cents per subscriber per month. Lifetime TV's operator share last year was $56.7 million, and its advertising revenue was $33.5 million. Its annual revenue was $92 million, and it realized a profit of $13.8 million. We plan to use 3 years to expand Lifetime TV's subscriber base to 60 million to 90 million through the first phase of the reform plan. We will also increase the operator's share to 25 cents. We also hope that through a series of high-quality TV programs, our advertising revenue will exceed the operator's revenue. We will achieve annual revenue of $500 million and net profit of $100 million. Katzenberg finished his simple report and was about to move on to the next topic when William Hearst, who was sitting on the left-hand side of the long conference table, raised his head and tapped on the document in front of him. He ignored Katzenberg and looked at Eric, who was sitting opposite him. Eric, last year's Victoria's Secret show was considered direct profits and indirect stock appreciation. It brought you more than $1.5 billion. Compared to that, don't you think this plan is a little too stingy? Eric leaned back in his comfortable leather chair and twirled a pencil in his hand out of habit. He smiled and said, "William, what happened last year was an accident. We have to take it one step at a time." With Lifetime TV Stations Foundation, it's already very impressive for them to achieve this goal in 3 years. Last year, all of Firefly's TV stations' total profits were only about $600 million. William Hearst stared at the young man across from him and said, "I don't pay much attention to the TV business, but I feel that this plan is not perfect. Or rather, there are some parts that are not explained clearly." Eric continued to beat around the bush. "This is just a draft. It definitely needs to be modified. Otherwise, we wouldn't have to hold this meeting today." William Hearst looked at the lazy smile on his face and said, "Eric, I mean regarding the original program production of Lifetime TV, this plan doesn't seem to specify how to do it right." Eric replied, "Oh, I don't think there's any objection to this. Other than the news, all the programs on the TV network are handled by Firefly's TV program production department. This time, of course, we have to follow the rules." Everyone in the room quieted down and listened patiently as the two big shots wrestled with each other. As industry elites, most of the people knew what the two big shots were discussing. When the two of them spoke up to this point, even the clerk who was in charge of recording the meeting and was still a little confused just now understood what was going on. Eric and William Hearst were discussing the ownership of the copyright of Lifetime TV's original program. Under normal circumstances, when a TV program's producer sold the first broadcast rights to the TV station, the sales revenue would only be a small part of the program's revenue. It might not even be able to recoup the cost. Most of the income of a TV program actually came from the distribution of the episodes and the syndication of the TV program after the first broadcast. The so-called syndication of the TV program was simply the program distribution system. A TV program's profits from the broadcast rights and remake rights in the U.S. and even in more than 100 countries around the world through the syndication program distribution system, would definitely far exceed the income from the first broadcast. The profits from the videotapes and syndication of the popular episodes could even be more than 10 times the production cost. This was also the reason why the protagonists of many TV series could be paid millions per episode. If there were no videotapes and syndication, the TV network would definitely not be able to offer such a sky-high salary just by relying on the first broadcast advertisements and the cable TV revenue. Most TV program production departments and distribution systems were integrated, so there was no need to differentiate between these issues. However, Lifetime TV's parent company, the AE Television Network, was different. The AE Television Network was jointly owned by Firefly and Hearst, with each party holding 50% of the shares. If Lifetime TV's original programs were produced by the AE Television Network's production department, then Hearst Group would be able to share in the profits from the videotapes and syndication. However, if these programs were produced by Firefly's TV department, the program's copyright would have nothing to do with the AE Television Network. Even though Hearst Group would not have to bear the risk of the production investment, they would not be able to share in the videotapes and syndication income. This was also why William Hearst had just said that the plan was stingy. If the TV station's cable TV revenue and advertising alone could make a profit of $100 million per year, the videotapes and syndication income would definitely be much more than that. As everyone knew, any project led by Eric, whether it was a movie or a TV series, could be associated with the word huge profits. Hearst Group certainly would not give up on this profit that was within reach. Even though Hearst Group was a giant in the print media industry, they did not have enough confidence in the management of TV networks. William Hearst had already realized that Eric's invitation to this meeting was not as simple as it seemed on the surface. At this time, he could only go along with his train of thought. He said, "Eric, I think it's more appropriate for the AE Television Network to be responsible for the production of this batch of original programs. Hearst Group can provide the production funds according to the proportion. In addition, if there is a need for print media support, we can try our best to cooperate." Eric seemed to have heard something interesting. He straightened his body and said, "Speaking of proportion, William, I think Firefly and Hearst's shareholding in ESPN is more balanced. What do you think?" Although William Hearst was prepared, when he heard Eric's words, he almost threw the document in his hand at him. He shook his head without hesitation and said, "Eric, this can't be done. Absolutely not." Firefly and Hearst's shareholding in the AE Television Network was 50-50, but their shareholding in ESPN was 20-80. Hearst had 20%, and Firefly had 80%. In the beginning, Hearst and Metropolis Media Group's rights in ESPN were equally matched. In the 1980s, before ESPN rose, Tom Murphy bought most of ESPN's shares from Hearst Group and several other small shareholders. At that time, he spent less than $50 million. Now, ESPN was the largest sports channel in North America, with an annual profit of more than $200 million in 1995. The shares that Hearst Group sold back then generated more than $50 million a year. With such a lesson in front of him, William Hearst certainly would not do such a stupid thing again. Hearing William Hearst's agitated refusal, Eric shrugged and said, "William, if you don't agree, then forget it." William Hearst was suddenly at a loss for words. After a moment of silence, he continued, "Eric, I've heard your idea for America's Top Model. This project needs a lot of support from the print media. Firefly sold all its print media assets last year. Without Hearst, it will be difficult for you to make this project big alone. William, I think this is a win-win situation. We'll get resources, and you'll get more news material." Eric shook his head, a confident smile on his lips. "Also, you've got one thing wrong. Even without Hearst, there's still Condé Nast and News Corporation. Firefly's relationship with these two companies is also quite good. I even have Yahoo. Although its influence can't be compared to traditional print media for the time being, its user base overlaps with the fashionable female audience of Lifetime TV. I think you can definitely see the potential of Yahoo's media operation during the Victoria's Secret show last year. William Hearst opened his mouth, but he could not find the right words to refute. Although he was unwilling to admit it, he had no choice but to admit it in his heart. Although the Hearst Group was very strong in the media industry, the Hearst Group was not indispensable to Firefly, who had more resources. On the other hand, without Firefly, it would be difficult for the Hearst Group to make AETV Network bigger alone. The current situation was that Eric had already put forward his conditions. Firefly wanted most of the shares of AETV Network. If the Hearst Group did not agree, then they would not be able to share most of the profits that Lifetime TV Network might bring after its growth. However, if they compromised, the Hearst Group would almost certainly repeat the mistakes of ESPN. After another round of hesitation, William Hearst said, "Eric, it is definitely impossible for Firefly to have 80% of the shares. At most, we will give you absolute control of the shares. You can completely transform this network according to your ideas. What do you think?" Eric shook his head. "William, the Hearst Group's business focus is on print media. I think you don't have to hold on to these television network assets at all. How about this? I will take a step back. Firefly only wants 75%. That is my bottom line." No, Eric, 55% at most. If it is higher, I would rather give up the rights of AETV Network to be in charge of program production and maintain the status quo. Hey, William. Did you know that last year's Emergency Room story cost less than $30 million to produce, but just the first season's syndication sales made more than $150 million? We will also be releasing videos in the near future. This income will be even more significant. Look at the advertising revenue. $45 million. The profit is only 1/10 of the syndication. 1/10. William Hearst had a helpless look on his face. But you can't make such a huge profit every time you film, right? However, alright, Eric, 60%. If it is higher, I'm afraid I will be criticized by the shareholders. You can't fool me, William. The Hearst family has always had firm control of the Hearst Group. No one will object to your decision. 70%. This is Firefly's bottom line. If you can't accept it, Firefly will not rule out buying a cable television station alone. Everyone in the meeting room listened to the back and forth between the two bosses. They were quick-witted and spoke quickly. It seemed that they did not hesitate to blurt out the words, but they were shrewd and calculative. They were all amazed. Westerners rarely saw haggling like a vegetable market. In the end, after arguing for more than 10 minutes, both sides finally decided on a plan that they could reluctantly accept. Firefly would hold 65% of the shares, Hearst Group would keep 35% of the shares. AETV station would be responsible for the production of Lifetime TV stations programs, and Hearst Group would fully cooperate in the print media resources. You're tuning in to the Earbook Haven YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.